School Board Public Meeting Workshop Session Number 3 on January 30th, 2024. So welcome, everyone. Let's have a roll call. Patty?
Recording in progress.
Oops.
Liz Barrett. Pip Clues.
I'm here at One Freedom Circle with my son. I'm just running behind right now, and I'm on my way there for personal reasons. Thank you.
Pip Clues. Here. Tish Campbell.
Here.
Gary Nolte.
Here.
Brian French.
Here.
Nancy Clayberg.
Here.
Lisa Rappaport.
Here.
Lee Hudson.
Here.
Byron Maddow.
Here.
And Danielle Miles absent, and Nathan Delaney absent.
Okay, can we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first item is public comment. Is there anyone here that would like to participate in our public comment? Is there anyone on Zoom, Matt?
Do. Yes.
Would they like to speak?
Yep.
Okay.
This is Alice Carey.
Alice, can you hear us?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you state your name and address, please? And you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, my name is Alice Carey. I live on Hillside Drive, and I am here tonight in strong support of the nature-based teacher position, and I encourage you all to find out more about its impact and potential for the district. I have had the honor of witnessing firsthand the dramatic difference that time in the outdoors can have on learners' physical and social emotional health, behavior and mood, and their ability to absorb and retain learning. These are foundational community building experiences that cannot be replicated in the classroom. Until 2 years ago, these types of experiences were available only for the lucky children who had classroom teachers and administrators focused on providing them, and parents willing to stick their necks out to advocate for them. This position arose out of a concern that activities like this were available only at maybe one elementary school, and there was a need to equitably disperse them throughout the district. And I was very proud to see the district committing to having a position that evenly distributes nature-based education across all of the elementary schools. It also provides scaffolding for educators who may not be maybe curious about doing this type of activity, but don't know how to align it with curriculum goals. So I've been very excited to see how the position has allowed that type of thing to happen. So I'll just say, please have the conversations, find out more about this position, how it could be absorbed into the budget. I think there's really groundbreaking work being done with it, and to discontinue it after only 2 years without finding out how those impacts are being made would really halt momentum in a program that's just beginning to take root. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. Is there anyone else on Zoom, Matt?
No one with their hands raised.
Okay. Okay, thank you. With that, we will declare the public comment session closed, and we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the workshop session number 3, and I will turn it over to Zach.
Okay, let me pull up so people at home can see. We'll start with the first of we have a very short slide deck that just makes it clear. Nathan had discussed in the open to the budget manual some of these positional impacts, but I want to make sure it's really transparent to people. Ooh, I gotta share my screen. Thank you very much, Patty. This is that. Oh, I need more microphones too. All right, just a second here. Okay. There we go. So you had a written summary of some of this stuff in your budget packet, but I want to make sure it was transparent to the public as part of the dialogue we're having around the proposal and then the impact it has on existing staffing patterns.
Thank you.
So, so the roles that would be, and actually before we get into this, let me talk about just the framework of what's happening. We're having our conversations that are occurring here at the school board. While that's going on, I think it's important for you to understand there's simultaneously the citywide conversation is also occurring that we fit within. So there's been meetings while we've been doing this work. Nathan and I have been involved in multiple meetings in connection with the capital improvement plan for the city that we have projects that are a part of. Was it last Monday? Last Monday night, we had gone to the city council meeting. They were having their first budget workshop, which was a conversation with the city manager around trying to set up some parameters around what the expectations were for the overall city budget. I would say that, so we were there, Nancy came to hear what that was going to be. And there really, I think the thing that came out that was clear, although not definitive, was they were looking for no new positions coming out across the city. And there was one role the city manager was talking about that might be split between IT in the city and the fire department. But even that might not be something that was going to go all the way through. That was, so of the two things we heard, I think, which were no new positions when the city manager came to us, and the possibility of 2.69 as an increase for us. 2.69 was not a big topic of conversation at the city meeting. Now, the mayor was not present for that meeting, so I don't know to what extent when they have their next meeting on Monday night, we'll get something new that might come out of that. But I walked away thinking, okay, we know that our current proposal can effectively answer the no new positions in the, we'll call it the local city budget, where the city budget is paying for it. We've talked about before that if we were going to try to hit the 2.69 number, that puts us in a situation where we would have to reduce our, what we'll call our continuing services budget by $1.6 billion. That could, one way of thinking about that would be the equivalent of, I think Nancy had tossed around 11 or 12 people who are on the professional scale as a possibility. So we didn't hear a reinforcement of that at the city council. I don't know what's going to happen on Monday night, but I did walk out of there feeling like maybe 2.69 was less of a thing than when we had initially talked with the manager. And I also felt like your response to 2.69 was one of, how we need to hang on to what we're doing right now, and kids need what we're doing. So how do we defend the spending that we might want to do? That was my impression, although you didn't take a formal vote. So just be aware that stuff is happening on the side. Yeah, Nate.
I would just jump in and say the meeting with the budget work session with council is online. You can see it. It was Wednesday night, actually.
Wednesday.
It was Wednesday the 24th. And as an element of backup or background, I should say, I think it's a great investment of your time. It's a quick meeting. I think all in with commentary and question and answer, maybe 45 or 50 minutes tops. So find that on the YouTube channel, and I would encourage you. The finance director and the city manager walk through background and information on financial policies, the non-operating budget elements of debt service, and their rules and parameters that they operate within, capital outlay, a whole host of. They talk about the health stabilization fund and the sick leave termination fund, and these tools that they put in place to help manage budget change over time. I think it's really worth spending a few minutes just to see some of that, because it's the backdrop against which our work is done.
So I think what's important, and I think Brian did a great job of talking about this when we had maybe that conversation after the manager to see us, was that our proposal, we would say on paper, is asking for a net zero, almost zero. Actually, it's like a little less than zero in terms of increase in terms of positions being paid for by the city budget. However, in order to get there, we have the ESSER money, the federal money that's going away, that wraps up in, so we have to, allocate by September, end of September this year. That goes away. When that goes away, these would be things that would be left behind if we were to stay with a proposal that would have no increase in bodies to the city budget. So we're already talking about 5 positions that would be left before we get to this, what we're calling a zero, a zero position budget. So, and I think it's important not to lose that. And I think, I think Brian said that, and I think some other people around the table were saying that. It's like, that can't be lost, that's like a real thing that has impact on what we're trying to provide. Now, the positions you see up here are, there are three positions that were, they're within our support staff, para group, that were added to Dondero over the summer as we had a bump of enrollments that we did not anticipate in kindergarten at Dondero. And so these 3 roles were basically worked as assistant teachers in Dondero kindergarten classrooms. So each of these were in one kindergarten classroom of the 3 at Dondero. And that was an attempt. We had savings from some other projects in ESSER. We utilized those savings to go out, and we were able to have people who are licensed teachers serve in those roles, and effectively you ended up with 2 teachers in each kindergarten classroom in Dondero. We knew that was just going to be for the year, and that was going to get us through that initial that initial bump. You also have the two of the 3 positions that last year were placed back into ESSER. We had talked about at this group last year about these roles, and we decided that our proposal, your proposal as a school board to the city council, was to take these 3 roles, the 2 here, the math interventionist at Portsmouth High School, the outdoor educator that was just discussed by our person in citizens' comments, that is split between the 3 elementary schools, and then a school social worker, and we'll talk about that position in a second. But in the proposal you have, those 2 roles would go with the ESSER money. In order to try to stick underneath that no additional positions proposal from the city manager and what seems to be coming from the council. So here's the breakdown of this. Also, the board had asked, like, what are the requests that you got that you didn't fulfill? This will also give you that information as well. Let's start up in the upper left-hand quadrant with the fill requests. So what are the things that we were requested as we met with budget leaders, which are principals and some department heads? What were the things that were asked for that this proposal would fill? And that does include the social worker that we were talking about that was within ESSER funds. This was a role that people felt, while it's stationed at the middle school, is shared to an extent across the district, and really has added a capacity that we didn't have before, and it is something that people really felt was important to find a way to hold on to. We were adding a classroom teacher at Dondero, adding a curriculum coordinator at the high school, increasing the art teacher, who is currently a 0.8 at Dondero, up to a 1.0 by adding an additional 0.2. We had 2 positions where we were going to transfer somebody out of Title I, a reading teacher, a Title I reading teacher and a math specialist at Dondero, and then we're adding an additional, due to the demand that we saw coming, which we're going to be dealing with a little bit in the spring, for students that would be eligible for our preschool special ed program, adding a teacher at PEEP. Now, in order to offset that, the positions that are over on the side were things that we changed. Either we reduced or we put back into some type of grant funding, so it wasn't coming out of, these were not positions that were going to be dealt with from the city budget. But it is really important. Please do not, even though we use this cutout from an Excel spreadsheet, this is a package deal over on the right. Don't think of it as the social worker and the vacant teacher position at New Franklin are direct trades, and they're 1-for-1 trades. They're not. It's a package deal, and it's just sat that way. But please don't think of these as, you trade one to get the other. We had a position due to a leave from somebody at New Franklin's school that we did not ultimately fill, and we felt that the student numbers in that particular grade made that okay for this upcoming year. And we're going to continue to use that position to create an FTE that someone else could fill. We have a teaching position from Little Harbor that we'd be moving in order to make the numbers work. We would be reducing a teacher position at PHS. We already have somebody who has resigned from a professional position, and that would be the default role that we would use. And then we are shifting a literacy teacher role into tutor roles into Title I federal grant, and then we're reducing a vacant literacy tutor. Down below are other requests that we received from folks through this process, and then you do have a one-to-one. What did we do? So the maths interventionist position, we collectively decided not to continue. The same thing with the elementary outdoor ed position. Those are both ESSER funded. So in order to maintain those roles, we'd be looking to reduce somewhere else. If we're going to come forward with a position that is a net neutral position proposal. There was a request to elevate a principal's secretary to cover an additional month during the summer. We decided to hold off on that. There was a request to add a school psychologist. We decided that we would move that to contracted services for now, that we would contract out any additional need in school psychology until we had a better feel for what the long-term need was going to be. We had the math position that we talked about that we transferred. We were going to transfer out of Title I. We decided not to. We added a special education in this proposal. We would be adding a portion of a special education case manager at RJLA. We have come together with our partners at SAU 50. They were interested in having not a full-time special educator who would be stationed at the high school primarily to help them monitor students from the SAU 50 communities who are at the high school and at the middle school, and be part of the meetings that were happening in relation to those students. But they could only cover a portion. And after some conversation, what we discussed is, well, we could cover a portion out of Lister. It would give Lister the ability to have some case management. SAU 50 would still get their ability to have their kids case managed from someone who was paid for through them, and then any leftover capacity would go to special education at the high school to help do additional case management. I think it's a creative solution, and it's great that the folks from SAU 50 are open to trying to partner with us in this creative way. The culinary arts folks had asked for a assistant to work, well, CTE had asked for an assistant to work with the culinary arts program to do, there's a lot of purchasing that goes on in terms of, a lot of it's food, making sure that we can go out and take care of the food and do all that purchasing. That is happening on a regular basis and basically is beyond the scope of the culinary arts instructor to do on their own. That was a request. What we will be doing is repurposing a vacant para position from FY25 to cover that role, and that person will be slotted at the same, basically about the same compensation. We did not decide to add an additional art teacher at the high school, despite it being requested. We did not decide to add a 20% position that would cover percussion across the district. We did not increase, there are 2 nurses at the high school, 1 is part-time. We did not decide to ultimately increase that nurse to full-time for the upcoming year. We did not move a special ed teacher out of the IDA as the big special education grant. We did not decide to move that into the local budget. It remains an IDA. And this is the perennial. Looks like Kenny gets additional help to oversee his large portfolio. And once again, this was one that got pushed off for at least another cycle. So that is the set that is in the current proposal in that binder that makes up the positional shifts that would get us we're just below a net number of positions. So happy to take some questions now and then also in future meetings on.
Do we know how much all of this adds up to?
In terms of net dollar changes?
Yes.
The bottom half of that list No, off the top. I mean, I probably, given a few minutes here, I have priced this all out, I think. So probably I have it in a spreadsheet, but I don't have a number for you. Everything that's above the line, the top,
requests.
the requests and how we did it in the budget, that's in the budget in your book. That's there now. But the stuff, the other requests down below, it's a lot. I guess there's a lot tied up in that, and I could certainly get it back to you. I might even be able to pull up something and give you a sense of the scope before we're done, because I know I priced this stuff all out at one point. I just have to go back and grab it.
Tish.
I have two questions.
Go, yes,
The nurse position,
yes.
was there a need for increase in the part-time? I mean, how backed up do they get? And this is at the high school?
Yeah.
Are they, are the kids' needs being met
So,
with the nurses that we have?
so there are several different, in our budget process, there are areas that exist in each building in some circumstances where we have a department head that covers multiple buildings in the system. And nursing is one of those. So this was proposed by the nursing department head for the school, for the district, excuse me. This was ultimately in conjunction with the high school having a conversation, was determined we felt like we were meeting need up to where we need to go. This is also, I would say, this. I don't know if this is at least 2 years in a row that this has been requested. This might be a perennial.
And last year there was actually make this 0.6 full-time and add another
Additional.
0.4
Right.
or greater to float as a substitute and to, enhance the services that are provided.
Right.
All of it, of course, of benefit. I mean, it would be good stuff, but this year they were more restrained and didn't ask for the extra 0.4 just to make this one full-time.
Yeah. So part of that for us is leaning on, the high school leadership telling us.
Okay.
To what extent do they feel that this is
Okay. My concern is the kids' needs are being met okay.
and I think in all these, all the things that are in these other requests are all things,
Yeah.
I'm pro these things. It's just if we're trying to, and I think it's in this case wise to be thinking about trying to hit at least one of the two pillars about what the city's talking about. And if we're trying to do that, then it was one, this was a give to get type of scenario, and ultimately we prioritize.
Right. No, I understand some hard decisions clearly had to be made. And my other question is, can you explain a little bit more what the special ed teacher under the IDEA actually means versus us paying out of budget?
Sure. I mean, you can clean up in aisle 12 on this one after I go. Effectively, Nathan, it's both salary and Benny's. The whole shooting match would be a full person that is just paid for through that grant. Now, what we could have done is, if we had the ability to pull, I think it was part of the request from Rick, was can you pull this out of IDEA? We just pay for it through city funds, and then we could reallocate that to purchase something else in the way of services that would help special education.
Okay.
In some other form.
So the follow-up is, the IDEA grant is it's right around $600,000. It's got 6 people in it. It doesn't support all of the 6 people's salaries any longer. The staff that we have grow more expensive with experience, and salaries are growing with our cost of living adjustments, et cetera, as are some of the costs related to them, like New Hampshire retirement costs have grown. So we're already to the point now where the grant won't cover all of the 6 people. So
Okay.
we're not making the grant pay for all of the taxes and retirement and benefits. We've shaved some of that back and slipped it back into the district, but we've kept the 6 positions. This won't go away now, because as our costs continue to climb, the allocation from the federal level is falling. It's not falling precipitously, but it's definitely trending downward. And so eventually, you have to give up one. And when you do, it's not like you bear all of the impact, because what Zach was just saying is true. There will be the opportunity to do some contracted service or to buy some supplies, because we'll make a bigger hole than we need to, do you know what I mean? Although,
Yep.
the first blush would be, when we go from 6 to 5 on the grant, I'll backfill with all of the taxes and such, as opposed to the district. So we'll have some savings that'll come, even as
Right.
we're paying for another human. So it's a conversation we've had for the last couple of years, because we've really reached a point where we're not covering all 6 of them. And, but because the city focuses a lot on FTEs, and in this case, one of the pillars of expectation is let's not have any headcount increase, so.
I think it's a fair thing to talk about is that we, and this is a little bit unique here, what I was told when I came in was in terms of budgeting, that was at the city level, there's a laser focus on how many additional positions are you adding. And that was a greater emphasis than I think in previous roles I've inhabited. And so we are very, thoughtful about how are we utilizing federal funds sometimes to put those positions in federal funds, because because we're more likely to be able to retain them that way. So yes. So in this case, that was we thought one of the ways in which to retain the special ed staffing was to keep it in IDA and shave some of the money off the side. So
Okay, thank you.
yep.
Liz has a question. Okay, let's go through the rest of the board that's here. Carrie, Pip, Lee, Lisa, Liz.
Within our prior discussions around need and contracted services, which can get really costly, I'm just curious if you have an idea for like the psychologist, the request for an additional psychologist, and where we end up. Like, how great are the needs that aren't
Yeah.
that would need to be contracted out?
So I don't know in terms of dollar amount, but
Dollar amount, I don't know.
we don't know
would
that.
be.
But in terms of the psychologists came and spoke with central office, specifically Patty, about their concern about their ability to keep up with the volume. Do you want to?
So they have increasing testing requirements that are coming to them for multiple reasons. And right now, we have 2 psychologists on staff. And as the testing requests come in, there are timeframes and there are just things, and sometimes there's a lot going on. We do have the ability to have psychology interns working with one of our 2 psychologists, because he has the requisite number of years in order to have interns working with him, which sort of scuttles some of the work onto an intern. But again, it's not, they're not going to keep up with the same amount of work as a fully vetted psychologist, school psychologist would do. So there is some need for that. However, in speaking with Rick Matty, the pupil services director, contracting some of those services to do testing to alleviate some of the volume that's coming at them will enable them to keep up and keep pace with that. I don't know what the cost would be, but that's one way to sort of look at a different perspective to provide what's necessary in order to meet the needs that are coming up.
And long term, we know in the not too distant future, we have the gentleman who has the ability to have interns. Sooner or later, he's only going to go so long, and so we'll lose that capacity to have interns at some point I would say in the intermediate kind of future. So it wouldn't surprise me if in a year from now we're back talking about, depending on how much this ends up costing us, we're back talking about an additional psychologist. But a lot of it will be, as we go through, if we were to go forward with this, we'll go through this year, we'll see what that looks like. And then that would drive whether or not we were back looking for an additional position. And it also depends on how much longer we have that gentleman with us, and whether if he was to at some point go in the next couple of years, we also take a couple of interns off the board at the same time. So I think you could assume that we'll be looking sometime in the not too distant future, we'd be coming back talking about additional psychologist capacity.
Just as a follow-up, 2 sort of thoughts. One around the training. And so, well, first of all, the just a lot of folks speak to me about special ed, and in general, I think I've gotten the impression that parents have felt a more proactive approach with the current team. And so I just want to make sure that they have that space to be proactive, because I do think there's a cost savings of having really great internal folks as opposed to folks going out for external evals. Obviously, that's everyone's right to do, but other things sometimes come with that. And the other piece is just thinking about training and what those evals are. I know that our special ed team is already burdened, but sometimes some of those screenings are able to be administered by not a psychologist with training, and just making sure that we have the funds and opportunities for special educators who are interested in getting that additional training to sort of support that role, so that you do have folks that know the kids well doing these things.
I think as we move into, depending on what comes out of what we move forward, what gets accepted, we'll be strategic about how we utilize who are our in-house people, to what extent do we have those people doing the most face time with folks, and the pieces that are more, we'll call it more mechanical, I think those would be the ones that we'd be trying to, as much as possible, those are the ones where we'd outsource as we're doing it.
And it's also important to point out that when referrals for special education come in, regardless of if they're in-district students, or we also have to provide services for some of the private schools, we have to also do testing for those students.
So that could be.
So that's, right, so
might
it
be
depends
that.
on how we shift that, but
Yep.
that's also part of the load that comes in. It's not necessarily all of our students only.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you, Carrie. Pip?
I have a comment more than a question, if that's all right, unless we are just doing questions as well. Okay. I just wanted to address the nature-based educator. I know that we reluctantly agreed to move that over to ESSER last year, but I want to emphasize that it was reluctant for exactly the reason that's come up today, which is that we are now, it is now not included as an existing FTE, and we're looking at losing it. And I think that we really need to think twice about that, because it is a role that we established because we believed in it, because it met one of our community's needs, and because we know it's effective and important for students. And it feels a bit like not having to let it go, because it is in fact a cutting of a position to match what the council is requiring or requesting of us, is a penalty on to us, because we did our best to save the city money last year by using our ESSER funds, and now we're being penalized by having to give up a position that we had in our budget. So I'd like to see us put it in our budget this year and not just accept letting it go. And I'd prefer to think of it as an existing FTE that is important enough to keep.
Thank you, Pip. I think, Lee?
So I guess my first question, and just want to make sure I'm clear here. So all three instructional tutors at Dondero were all kindergarten-based?
Yes.
And so that's because of the 65-plus students that were part of kindergarten?
Yep.
What is the expectation for enrollment for this coming year?
So this is one of the challenges, I think, about how we're working on now. So this type of work happened very late in our district. And so I know the elementary folks are working on a much earlier timetable in terms of our enrollment stuff. And I don't know, do you have more?
March 11th, I believe, is the go-live date for kindergarten registration to open, so that we'll put the call out to make sure that folks can start registering early. Doesn't always mean it's going to be well-received, but we'll open it up earlier so that we get a better idea of what we've got coming into us. But that's no guarantee on us getting a good final number.
Because I think we walked into the summer, I'm trying to think, we walked into the summer with 18 or 17 maybe.
Yep.
And we were getting nervous about it, but then in addition to that, then the summer brought a swell
Yeah.
of additional kids. More so, my understanding from talking to people, was more so than what is typical. There typically is a drib and drab during the summer, but this was more so than typical. So what would happen is, as those go away, two possibilities. One, and we'll talk about class sizes in general. It's a shuffling of staff, and how many first grade classrooms do we have, and how many second grade classrooms, and do we move around that mix? The other is we'll be having a conversation. We're going to be meeting soon. The redistricting study group is going to be meeting soon with folks in planning around housing and what do we anticipate and what's going to happen in that regard. That could, if we see a problematic number of students at Dondero, we don't right now. I don't anticipate redrawing lines for this upcoming fall, but we did in one of our earlier slides talk about portable classrooms, and that we would move to portable classrooms as a possibility if we needed to. For the fall, we priced out two portable classrooms, and we would relocate some teachers from some of the other buildings to Dondero if we felt that was necessary. Okay. Now, we've had some conversation with the city about that money is not included right now in this proposal. It's $100,000, but we've had some conversation with the city around that coming from another city fund that would allow us to do it. And we're still, and they're at least open to that conversation, depending on need.
May I ask a second question? So my second question is really around the testing that we were just talking about, right, from a special ed standpoint. Has the school district ever thought about engaging the Institute on Disabilities at UNH to help support some of that?
I can't speak to what's been done most recently. I think and I'll just say, I think this is a place that has always had a really strong relationship with UNH. So I can't specifically speak to that. I know that we're always exploring those types of partnerships, but I'm happy to see what the story is there.
Just wondering. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Are you finished?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Lisa, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I just briefly want to say I really agree with Pip, and I was definitely one of the people that was quite concerned about moving the outdoor education, into ESSER for exactly where we are. I guess my question related to that is, if the position goes away, what does that mean for the program? Because we did have sort of a bit of a, kind of bottom-up idea that started at Dondero and was really well received, and then it moved to the other schools, and we are having this conversation about equity as part of our budget conversation. So if it goes away, do we have a plan for what we would do?
I don't think it, so I think right now it wouldn't, so the position, there's my understanding of the creation of the position. The idea was the position itself was not going to be the deliverer of outdoor education, but was going to build capacity within staff to be, so there was always the idea that this would be a booster rocket to create capacity within staff across the elementaries so that they had a comfort level with engaging students in the outdoors and integrating curriculum in a way that would be appropriate, where what you're doing is actually reflective of standards that we're trying to hit, that type of thing. So I think there was always going to be a lifespan on this, is my understanding. I mean, I wasn't here for the creation of it, so I think the answer is we would take whatever capacity has been developed, and we'll try to move on with that capacity. But there is no doubt that the level of outdoor engagement that is happening now would recede a bit. How much? I'm not sure. We don't anticipate at the moment that would be that. I'm not anticipating the moment where if the position goes away, we're going to mandate all teachers must be outside X amount of days. Like, that wouldn't happen. What would happen is, who are the people that have been part of, because this is not all teachers right now even.
Yeah.
Who are the teachers who have been part of the program, and then what can we do to help continue to encourage through finances, logistics, et cetera, those folks to continue to do the work. But it would not exist in the same way. But it's also, like I said, it's also important to realize it's right now it is not everybody either. So.
That's really helpful. I mean, I do recall us having that conversation about it being that sort of accelerator type of idea where you get everybody trained up and around it, and then they don't still need the same level of support. I think that I would love to know later in the budget conversation any more detail around that, because it's a concern to me beyond just whether or not we do outdoor ed about sort of what the consistency is, because if we're putting the money into it for a few years because of the strong belief, and then we pull the money, and then we change our mind after we're done strategic planning, if it comes up again as a priority, it feels like we're maybe saving money in the short term to potentially not make the best use. I don't know enough about it to say that that's what's happening, but I'd love to know more.
Sure.
And then I have an unrelated question, if I can ask a second. I'm curious about the curriculum coordinator at the high school. I know that we added, Shea St. Laurent's position as, head of curriculum, and that's met a huge need. And I guess I'm not clear in my mind about how is this different from the role that's already there, and what's the thinking behind that?
So I would say this is a super high priority for Steve, and I think what he would tell you is that that's for the change. I think there's a lot of things we want to change at the high school, and that this adds additional capacity around doing that, and particularly around. And this is true of a lot of high schools. There's a tendency for high schools to have folks in high schools have almost work as like private practitioners, more so than in some other schools. It's just like you go in, you have your subject area, you do your thing, and you're not necessarily engaged, with your entire school as a whole. There's an expectation sometimes in some high schools that you're doing that. And you're not necessarily engaged in the same way, even at a department level. And so what the high school is trying to do is make some whole-scale changes, specifically around, I would say pedagogy is a big push. Like, they want to change the way we teach, and really want to think about not how do we address the needs of students who are coming to us who are expecting a different way of teaching now. They're not expecting stand and deliver kind of stuff. They've gone all the way up through the system, engaged in other types of learning. And so if we're going to take those types of steps at the high school, which involve both some curricular realignment and some really interesting questions. I mean, we talked about APs. What are we doing with the direct enrollment? How are we having really thoughtful conversations about vertically aligning curriculum? How are we engaging people, not just telling them what they're going to do, but engaging staff in those conversations to create outcomes they feel ownership over, while not expecting them to do the entire lift, and then simultaneously intermingling that with how are we going to update our pedagogy. Steve really feels like, and we've had somebody in this role this year, we basically had a teacher who was assigned to do this work. So this is not adding a new person. It's really, we want a continuation of what the partnership has been, which is, right now Jackie Chisholm, who's a longtime English teacher, has served in that capacity over the past year with Shea. And that's really been a dynamic duo to drive a lot of both curricular and pedagogical change. This would basically take that use of Jackie and make it permanent, is what the goal is. And I would say, Steve, if Steve was here, I mean, Steve would be extremely passionate about this being like a key cog in the upcoming year for the next couple of years for the high school in terms of where they want to go.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Liz, and then Brian.
Thank you. I'm almost there, but I need to pull over right now. So I just first off want to say I appreciate the difficult task that Zach, Nathan, and Patty are put in with having to make these difficult decisions when they have their administration coming to them saying that they need these positions, and then you all are having to make a presentation that says we're not going to add these positions. And so I just want to be clear, can you all hear me right now?
We can, Liz, yes.
Okay. So that is such a hard position you are in, and I appreciate the judgment calls that you are having to make tonight in making these presentations. My concerns lie, though, Alice Carey was the one person that called in for public comment, and she was the lead parent in getting Dawn Darrow to really focus on a nature-based learning, and she took her own personal time to educate Dawn Darrow educators and work with them to really have them understand how they can add this to their classroom. And I agree, I think it was Lisa who said something about the nature-based position was a position to educate educators on how they can continue to add this to their classroom at every grade level. And so I don't know how much the nature educator is applying to my child when, you know, his teachers are leading a nature-based education as well on some days of the week or in general. And so I think this is where it would be great to hear from the people that are requesting these positions. Traditionally, in the past, we've heard from various people. We've heard from every elementary school. We've gone through the gamut, you know, hearing from the elementary schools, hearing from the middle schools, and I think we all had a conversation that maybe this was not productive. But right now, with where we're at with budget cuts, and I'm happy to make a motion if necessary, I think it would be great to hear from these people that are requesting these positions. Specifically, positions that maybe should be funded and continued to fund by ESSER funds. I'm concerned that the prior board, before the new board came on, made a decision based on information we received from Nathan, and not saying it was a bad decision, it was the right decision at the time, but the decision to use ESSER funds, to utilize them because they need to be used in a certain time frame, to fund the windows at Dawn Darrow. I believe it was, and don't quote me because I don't have it in front of me, but we voted to present to the city council that we would use a portion of ESSER funds to fund the windows at Dawn Darrow. And I have asked a couple times, and I don't know where we're at, but I've asked a couple times that maybe the city council potentially consider this as a bond project, so that we could free up those ESSER funds to use them for things that we really need. I mean, we're hearing that we need nurses, we need psychologists, we need a nature-based educator. But I think I need to hear from those people as well. So I think number one, I would really like to have, and if we need a motion, I will create a motion, but I would like to hear from the nature-based educator or from Zach about what the nature educator is doing. I did try to look on the website to see the monthly newsletter. I haven't seen one from January. I'm not exactly sure, and I think Pip made a point to it as well. I'm not sure exactly how that position is being utilized right now. It'd be really great, and I think Alice made a point too, to understand further what that position is offering our students, especially as they're coming out of COVID and having some severe behavioral issues, and how that position is helping our educators navigate dealing with children who have been home and have dealt with a different type of learning style for several years, and also mental health issues and everything else. So I do think that it would be really great if next meeting or the meeting after we could hear from these positions, and also to help educate the community. If we're going to ask the community to have a budget increase, I think the community really needs to understand what these positions are doing and their need. And I think it's best to hear from the person themselves too, and be able to ask questions of them. Maybe it's not the most appropriate. Maybe it's better to hear from department heads or principals, but I think we need to hear from them a little bit, Zach, just to present to the community what exactly we're going to be losing if we cut these positions. And I guess with that being said, I asked my fellow school board members to hear me out here, and I'd like to do a motion to reconsider.
Liz, hold on for a second. Liz, listen, we don't.
Reconsider.
Liz, we don't. Liz.
Nancy, I'd like to make a
No, we don't make motions during work sessions. Liz, we do not make motions during work sessions. We'll take your suggestions under advisement. We do not do motions in work sessions.
on the next agenda, Nancy, I would like to have a motion to reconsider my vote because I voted in favor of it. to fund the windows with ESSER funds.
Okay, we'll talk about that at our agenda planning meeting. We'll talk about that. We're going to move on, Liz. Brian and Kerry have comments they want to make.
Could I just address?
Right. All right, go ahead.
So, well, it's not connected to emotion, so twofold. First, when it comes to ESSER funds and funding positions, so ESSER is done September 30th of this year. If you hadn't funded the other project and you put $1.5 million into people, you would be cutting 15 people tonight. So the reason, I remember when I was hired, and I wasn't yet, and we were in the midst of trying to hire a high school principal, and we were getting ready to put out the search to look for Patty, and I was still working in Vermont. Nathan and I were talking during your budget season during that period of time, and we were having some conversation about how people were contemplating ESSER and what to do with ESSER. And Nathan let me know, well, there's some positions that people might, it will save a tough conversation by putting some positions into ESSER. And I'm driving in the car with one hand, trying not to crash, and I'm like, do not let them put positions into ESSER. And of course, you guys had signed me on, I had signed on the dotted line, but I was not working for you yet. But it was like, this one-time money should go to one-time costs, because you don't want to use one-time money to set up yourself where you hit a cliff on the backside. Do not let them put it in ESSER. And that was in relation to the board, but it was also in relation to city council. Like, don't do it, because it always comes back and bites you, and there's always a situation where you get to the point where you're like, oh my God, now what do we do? So ultimately, really, the Dondero project we did a trade with the city to cover our community campus renovation for Lister. And so we ended up utilizing money that would have gone to the Dondero windows that were part of the CIP. We then said, look, instead of doing that in the CIP, we'll do it through ESSER, because it's an ESSER eligible project, and we'd request that you reallocate that money to do the upfit at Lister for community campus. That's why Nathan made the recommendation. I think it's the right recommendation, and ultimately why people got behind it, because we were making the trade for Lister and didn't want to use one-time money for positions that would go away. On the other one, I don't think it is good budget practice to. We're giving you greater transparency than the city gives the city council, right? City staff have conversations about what they want to add, what they want to take away, what they want to do. Ultimately, the city manager makes a proposal that is weighing all the different aspects of what people are prioritizing, not prioritizing. There are conversations behind the scenes about what is happening in particular positions, what people envisioned would happen in those positions, what's actually happening in those positions, how successful the people were in those positions, how else could we cover some of those things. Is it really something that is successful, not successful? What are some other ways in which we could build that capacity over time? All those types of things, I would say, go into the sausage making of budgeting. If you go and pull back in, so we've gone through the process of creating the sausage, or a proposed sausage. If after that's all done, you then pull back individual people who don't have the whole big picture, and then relitigate what those conversations are, you will not get the full picture. You're not going to. You're going to get a snapshot of one particular person's viewpoint about their particular project, which may or may not affect their own job or their own compensation. I don't think that is an effective way to budget, and it also disincentivizes your middle managers and the people at the top to make hard decisions, which you need to do when you go through a budgetary process. So if we go back, and part of some of the choices have made have been in conversations with some of those leaders who are like, I got this proposal, I'm going to push it onto you, but I'm not sure I totally believe in it. I'm not then having that conversation necessarily here at the table. I'm making those decisions with other folks. I want to have transparency. I want you to be able to make good decisions. I don't think if someone wants to make a proposal at the next meeting to bring back in every person who was denied a request, I worry about what you ultimately end up with for a budget, what the nature of your public conversation is, and what that does for future budget processes going forward. So, anyways.
Zach, well then what do you recommend? Because I think we need to understand what this nature-based position looks like and what is being cut. I think we need to I think the board and the community needs to fully understand what is being cut right now, and that is our only, sales pitch to the community, that maybe we need a higher budget. And I didn't say before, but I was involved with the rec meeting, and the rec department seems like it's under budget. So I think we need to get creative here about how we're funding positions, but I don't think the board can sit here and say, yes, cut this position, or yes, keep this position, without fully understanding what is this nature-based position been doing that we put into
Sure.
ESSER.
I think here's a challenge.
I also am concerned because I have asked if there's a way to bid out this project for these windows, whether they've been fully completed or not. But I think that's another creative way that we could pull back money from ESSER and use it for what ESSER was intended for. ESSER was intended to help children federally. And I guess my last question that I would add on there too is, do we have a person that is specifically targeting federal funds and state funds within the department? And I appreciate everything you're doing. I don't say this as like a negative thing or an attack on you, because I think you're doing a really great job here, Zach, and you've really put a lot of time and thought into this. But I really wonder, is there somebody that's really targeting what we have available besides Nathan and department heads? If, we have somebody that we could designate at some point to really target these federal funds and really make sure that we're taking advantage of what's available for us here. And I just want to be sure that, it seems a bit counterproductive, although I fully understand. We had this conversation. If we want a position, keep it in the budget. Put it in the budget if we want to keep the position. We need to use these funds by a certain date. That was what the board chose to do. So I'm concerned that these really high-need positions, like a nurse, psychologist, tutors, nature-based positions that are really going to help kids because of what COVID caused, are being cut. That's the heart of what ESSER was for, and I feel like we're doing a disservice to the community if we don't target those needs when they are needed. If we could bid out a project and push off some of that so we could really hit this home for these kids right now for the next couple of years and try to come out of what COVID has caused, I think we need to do that, and we really need to focus on that, and that's it. Thank you.
So the money is not available after September. We have to finish up the money September 30th.
ESSER
There's no ESSER anymore.
You can't use ESSER to fund any positions next year, period. Like, there just is no ESSER after September. Like, you'll start the school year and you could pay for 10 or 15 days of school, but then there's no more ESSER. Federal law will not allow you to continue to spend ESSER in that way. So part of
and the Dondero project is this summer.
And the Dondero project for Windows is being completed this summer.
That's why we're getting under the wire.
By September 30th.
Okay, can we move on to Brian? Oh, did you want to say something else?
I wanted to give you your answer. That list, the bottom half, it's just under $1.1 million, and it would be an additional 1.76% on your budget.
1.76.
The budget, which right now, with no positions added, just that, those adjustments, is at 5.39%. And I just want to make sure, because as we talk about this outdoor education position, because I have 3 new members, and I don't want to advocate for or against, I just want to make sure it's clear. The position never existed in the budget. The position, when it was conceived, was funded through ESSER. Last year, we had 5 positions in ESSER that the board decided to propose to the council, to the city manager, and the council by extension, to propose that all 5 come out of ESSER. For this reason, worried about the cliff, all 5 come out, and ultimately the council pushed back and allowed 2 to go in the budget. That was a counselor at the middle school and a math tutor position. But these 3, the social worker, the math interventionist, and outdoor ed, were left in ESSER. for this year. And of course, this is the last year that ESSER can fund them. And so that's why we faced this cliff. I just want to make sure, a couple of comments that I heard sounded like we took it out of the budget and we kicked it. We didn't really, because we never successfully got it in the budget, but we tried last cycle. That was a request that we made of the city, so.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because we all voted and tried to keep these positions, a lot of these positions into the budget and out of ESSER for this reason. So it wasn't like we just voted and said, yep, all ESSER, we're all good. I just had a couple questions around, you mentioned on the Dondero tutors.
Yep.
Were two of them teachers, or all three of them were teachers?
So all 3 certified teachers.
All three were
Yeah.
certified,
Okay.
yep.
And then you're
Working
going to
as
add
tutors.
next
But they
year.
were working as a tutor, so.
Working as a tutor.
Yep, yep.
But they were big classrooms, right?
Yes.
So, and then you're going to add another teacher next year. I'm guessing you're getting rid of these 3 and adding a teacher this year. Is there any need for one tutor?
Well, it depends.
I'm just saying, like, you had these.
It depends
two
on a couple of
teachers.
things, and when we look at class sizes, when we get to the equitable conversation, and we look at class sizes, I mean, some of this is around how many kids do we get in kindergarten? It's going to be big. Do we have a similar? It's a bubble. You'll see it in the incoming kindergarten group compared to what we've got, because some of this can just be fixed by reallocating the number of classrooms that we, are we doing 4 first grades, and now we go from 22 kids per group to 18 or whatever it is. So some of it is going to be in there. We won't have all the answers, we'll have hopefully we'll have a better picture in March.
Earlier indications, hopefully, before we get into summertime, we're hoping, as long as people show up to register, because we'll put the call out.
And that's
but
going to be the big push.
We should know earlier, right?
Is that we need folks to register early.
Yep.
So could there be a need? I mean, they'll take whatever additional capacity, they can get. But I think that the hope is through the transfer of an additional staff member and then the reallocating of where students are, that would be okay. And if we see another bump, then we'd be talking about a portable or 2, and then reallocating a teacher, probably from Little Harbor, most likely, in order to pick up some of the slack.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying, even if there isn't another bump, you've had more people,
Yeah.
in that building.
Yeah, and I think I would say this, I think that yes, we've had those additional people, I'll just say that.
Okay. And the other question I had was on you mentioned one of the reduced teacher position, that was the person that's retiring, or long-term?
Which one, at the high school?
Yeah,
High school, we have recent notification of a resignation.
got it.
So, and that'll be coming to the board soon. And so the default would be that would be the role that would go. But we would have some time to kind of sort through whether or not, if somebody else retires or something else happens, we might make a different choice. So.
And just a final comment, my kids benefited from outdoor ed at Dondero.
Yep.
All 3 of them, teachers did take the initiative in the beginning, and I really like the idea of outdoor ed, and I'd like to see how that comes out of the strategic planning. Really, I hope to see some of that there. But, I definitely want to keep something going. And obviously, the hope would be a position, but because I do think that needs to be organized. It's something that's above and beyond what a lot of teachers can handle. But I'm also really concerned about the math interventionist going. Probably, it just seems like the time where we need some of these extra support, like the tutors at Dondero or the interventionist at the high school. Just something for us to all consider when we think about these positions. And I said before, we can vote. City council might change our vote, but we can also make it known what we're thinking, where our heads are at, especially when it comes to supporting our kids around tutors and interventionists. So.
Harry?
I wanted to, I think I'm very split on the nature-based education because of the last 2 sessions we've had and the kind of dire bleak nature of the budgeting. I think just based on the amount of communication we've gotten from the community, it's really important. And I know that that works best when there are people with adequate time and energy to focus on that. But as you had said, it was a transitional gain competency with teachers and kind of be a support. I guess one of the things I just wonder is, you know, we have a lot of different initiatives that come through. So for instance, social emotional learning in that curriculum has come through. We don't have a coordinator for that or a designated person for that. And new curriculums come every time. In the meantime, we have had an elementary curriculum person be across all of the elementaries. And so I think regardless of what happens, I think that I would really like to see a plan for how that nature-based, you know, I could go either way right now, but if wherever we end up, how do we continue it if that position does go away? And how can we leverage that new or repurposed elementary curriculum coordinator to ensure that it continues across the schools?
So I would say I wouldn't envision us repurposing the curriculum coordinator piece to take on that role. Now we do have, just step back to the wellness, we do have a wellness coordinator. And so the SEL stuff is connected back to the wellness coordinator. So that's there. In terms of this capacity, and I think again, it's a growing capacity. So it is not mandated that any teacher engage in what we currently have. So you have pockets of teachers who are engaged in utilizing the capacity building of this program. And so that, and I'm happy to bring in somebody to have some additional conversation about it. But it's, for some teachers, it looks different for different people. So some people are like, I have no idea what to do with this at all. And so the outdoor education coordinator will go with them and actually really do it, and the other person will kind of be there to assist on the side, try to get their sea legs. In other classrooms, people have been at it longer. It's a it's more of a side by side type of thing, with the idea that the classroom teacher eventually would be, in the position to be the lead person without those training wheels from the outdoor educator. But again, that has not, from its inception, has not been a mandated expectation across grade levels. It's been kind of the coalition of the willing who would like to be part of the programming. So it's different. You have a different number of percentage of teachers at each of the elementaries who are involved to different levels. So.
One other topic quickly. I just thinking, and I know that the redistricting committee has not met yet and will soon. But hearing, I mean, I am a little worried about the expense of a temporary thing, and from even just like a sustainability component of like, why are we going to put something up and tear it down in a year? And so I guess I would just ask for consideration of, on that kindergarten registration, that we put a question or an item to hear from parents on who might elect or prefer to be at. I mean, I think we all know that it's Dondero enrollment is high, Little Harbor is shrinking. And so even to put that on there of who might consider, because it might be something that we could initially transition electively, and we can discuss that, the committee can discuss that more.
And something interesting to think about. I think that my only concern is about the elective piece as a concept is transportation. And then if we're not going to provide transportation, then the equity of people who have means or the ability, those people get to choose and other people don't. And that would make me uncomfortable. But I hear what you're saying, and it's definitely something worth the committee tossing around for sure.
Okay, can we move on? All right, let's hear from Lisa and Liz, and then we're going to move on.
So just really quick comment. I really appreciate the transparency, and I really, as hard as those choices are, hope that we do continue to get to see what were the requests that you had to wrestle with, because I think it's really helpful in thinking about the big picture for the district. And I hope that as the strategic planning keeps going, that we can look at a lot of these programs, including outdoor ed, like elementary Italian. Like there's been a lot of things that have bubbled up that are really great, but I don't know if we yet have a long-term plan for where they're going to go. And I think that for the budget and a lot of reasons, it will be helpful to just have that
Agreed.
down. That's all.
Thank you, Lisa. Liz?
Thank you, Nancy. I want to reiterate what Lisa said too. I think strategic planning, we're obviously really invested in that. And, there are other programs like elementary Italian. I think we also received an email about the fact that we're a school that doesn't have many languages too. Like we're missing on our languages. So I just want to follow up on a couple things that you said, Zach. You mentioned maybe bringing somebody in to give us some greater clarity about this outdoor position and where we're at as far as outdoor ed generally for the elementary schools. I think that would be super beneficial. But if a motion is needed, Nancy, I'm happy to make one. But what I would like to see is what we all talked about at the first budget meeting. We all talked about that maybe we weren't going to be able to reduce our budget because we needed these positions. So what I would honestly like to see is a budget that includes these requests. I know there's probably many more requests besides what we're seeing today. These were the top priority requests that maybe have bubbled up, but I assume that there may have been other, fun requests or requests that may have been more like, how do we advance this program versus what do we need right now? And so what I would really like to see is a budget that includes these positions. What would our budget be if these positions were included? Maybe we can calculate it right now, Nathan. I don't know with 6.2 what that would look like. Maybe you already have these numbers. I don't know.
You were in transition, but let me just tell you, these positions below the line, I estimated, I went back to the spreadsheets, it's about $1.1 million.
Okay.
And it would add 1.76% increase more, so your 5.39 would be 7.15%.
Okay.
And you'd be
Is there
picking
any
up-
way to have a side, like just for presentation purposes, to have a side-by-side budget? Like what is being requested, what we actually need? What is being requested, what we actually need right now? And maybe where we're at as far as bargaining purposes of what we might be able to cut. But these positions feel so important to me. I think, Tish made a great point. I mean, we're asking for a nurse at the high school. We're in the middle of the flu pandemic, COVID pandemic, RSV. We've been sick back to back to back. If anybody can make that better for me and my family or anybody else to make sure that people are, using the right precautions, being safe, that quarantining, doing all those things, that's going to limit not only learning loss, but job loss and everything else. And I think these are really important positions. So I'm a little bit concerned. And so I think it would be beneficial for the community to see what we need, what is being requested, what we need, full budget, this is what we need. And maybe
I think we're addressing that, Liz. Nathan just answered the question that it would add 1.1 million, which is a 1.76% increase. So it's our job, I guess, to get that word out to the community.
I know, but I think, Nancy, the only reason why I say that is I think when you came in, and I think you even said it yourself, that if we need these things, we need to advocate for them, right?
Exactly.
So I think we need to be advocating for a 7.1 increase if that's what it is. And so I would like to see.
If that's what we agree on as a board, we have to advocate for that. I think Brian said it
Yeah.
at our first meeting. He said we have to go for what is best for us.
So I think we need, I would think it'd be ideal to see that within the budget.
We already have it. We already have it. We don't need. I don't know what more you need to see. It's already down here.
I guess I maybe more where it would fall within the budget and have a side by side of this is where it would fall. I don't know and I don't know what we've done traditionally, but I don't know if there's a better explainer or
this paper is all we need as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
So let me have a hard conversation, and sometimes this is part of the reason why we don't want to sometimes we don't want some of this stuff to be transparent as we're making tough choices, because we have to say tough things that we might not want to say publicly about programs and stuff.
But I think that's why we're here, though.
I hear that. I hear that. But so, for example, this is good in terms of thinking about process. So we've had a lot of community outreach about outdoor education. We've had the ones that I can see. We've had 4 emails. So we if you, as we sit down and we had these really hard conversations with principals, ultimately, when we first came in, we said, okay, guys, we're trying to be, and our thought process starts with, and I appreciate the advocacy everyone has at the table, we want to have a plan that we think that passes in March. We have like a really high probability of getting through the city council, so that we're not in June and it's like, oh, we just lost 5 positions that we thought we were going to have, and we've been planning around having, and there's been a public, even though the city council just controls the bottom line, there's been a public conversation about how they think we should reduce 5 particular things, and then we have to decide, well, we're just, after they reduce us down to a bottom line, are we just blowing off what they said publicly was the reason why they gave us a certain number, and we're just doing what we want anyways? I think for the most part, we feel like that's not where we want to be. So we design what we design coming to you with our thought process about what do we think is most likely to succeed, and what are those parameters. In that, we make decisions that are really difficult, because when we sat down with principals, we had told principals, like, guys, this is what we think it's going to be. Here's where we think we're going to be at. We need you to come in really, really tight. And then we showed them, after they had their individual conversations with us and budget heads, we sat down with principals and we said, well, we want to show you what you requested from us when we said basically.
Zach, I'm sorry.
Let me finish.
But we're the school board, though. We're the school board, though. They're the city council, and if they want to come low, that's fine. But I think we need to come higher.
Liz.
So, when we showed principals that list, that was going to be, that everybody anticipated was going to have 1 or 2 people in it, we had 14 positions, and the whole room half sighed and half laughed. And it's like, this isn't going to get it done. Like, come on, guys. Like, so this would be 1.1 million on top of 1.6 if we followed the city manager. It'd be $2.6 million worth of reductions that we could never responsibly do without having chaos in the system, right? So,
But
that,
sorry, I think we can get creative.
Liz, he's not.
I know, but there's budget cuts coming from the rec. I'm concerned that we're the school board and the city council is trying to override
Liz.
us actually hearing this.
Leave the room if you're not going to be quiet.
so, I'm trying to get my train of thought back.
All right, so
So we go. So let's get back to the hard thing. So, as I said, on the city side, they go through similar conversations, right? But they don't. These things aren't. They don't throw here are all the choices we didn't make out on the table. There's a reason why. They do that. So, for example, with outdoor education, if you ask me for a prioritized list of things that the people who run your schools think should be the first things that go back into the budget, outdoor education is not the first thing. It's not. It's just, but we haven't gotten emails about these other things, right? So, and I respect the person who's doing our outdoor education programming, and I think that person has worked really hard. And there's a lot of great things about what people want that program to be and where it could be potentially. But the people, and I'm not just talking about me. I'm talking about the team of people who run the schools, including the people who run those buildings, would not have outdoor education as the first thing we're putting back in, and wouldn't have it as the second thing we're putting back in. So that's the challenge of, let's bring in people and have individual conversations that relitigate the process that's already happened to this point.
But I think the board needs to understand, we voted for that position to be there, and I think the board needs to understand further from the people.
Your point.
But no, Nancy, but the point that you were getting to is that the board needs to present to the city council a higher budget maybe.
Okay.
And now,
you're going to have to leave the meeting if you don't stop talking. Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
May I ask a question? And it's brief. Could we just have some information about how effective the math interventionalist at the high school has been? That concerns me because we always have, math scores tend to be a little on the low side sometimes.
So again, let's have more hard talk that we wouldn't have if we didn't do this process, right? What you would hear, and no disrespect to the person who was in the position, was if you sat down and you had a public truth serum on the high school principal and say the position as structured was not as successful as we wanted it to be. So we need to structure in a different way to improve math scores. to make sure kids have better math instruction. Most of the work, when we were talking about before about the curriculum coordinator, the bulk of this year about the person who we would have inhabit the curriculum coordinator role, it's been in the math department. We've been doing intense work in math. It's been 2 people involved in that department. And that's, again, math department are good, hardworking people. They're doing good stuff. But that's where we're trying to move the ball forward. We really think that's where we're going to improve things. Theoretically, abstractly, a math interventionist feels like, okay, we're not as good at math as we want. We'd like to have this role in order to augment something that we feel is not going as well as we'd like. But it has not played out to have as big an impact as we hoped it would have. Not due to the skill level of the person involved, as much about the structure of who the kids that we're seeing, how it fits into the rest of what we're doing. It just didn't work to the level to which we would say, let's hold on to that and let's not do something else, right? So that's the challenge with this type of, let's pull these things all back out and have these kind of individual conversations, is that those having to have a dialogue about that, like, oh, math intervention didn't work, you could say failed the way we wanted. Well, that then puts the person who was in that position on a spot where it's being declared that their work was a failure, even though it really wasn't. It wasn't. It just didn't work the way we wanted it to. The same thing with some of the other things we're talking about. Do we see a trajectory where some of these programs get to where where people think in terms of vision they want it to be? No. So that's why some of these things are not on the table. For me, it's less about when we talk about kind of going through that decision-making process. It's not about Zach, I'll tell you what it is and you just let me roll. It is about, these are painful conversations to have about people who work for us in the public realm. And I think having some dialogue that pushes us to explain why we're proposing what we're proposing is important. But to redo a process that basically we've already done to get you up to a point and basically say, this is, by the way, the other requests, this is all the personnel requests we received at the principal/department head level. You're seeing every single one. Were there how much further do you want to go down? Every request a teacher made about something they like to add to their classroom for technology, how much additional construction paper they like to have in 2nd grade. Like, all those things are part of a dialogue, and they're all legitimate. They're important, and we value the voice of our staff, and then we make tough decisions as we go up the chain to get to something where we're presenting you something we feel we have rationale behind. We're happy to talk about that rationale and how we think it advances the goals of the district. But if the move was to spend the next 2 meetings bringing up somebody in connection to every single one of these positions that at some level was requested, I don't know where that goes. And I'm not sure it leads to effective outcomes, and I don't know that budgeting via email is the right way to go either. And I don't mean that, again, respectful of citizen input, all those types of things. I don't know how that leads to positive outcomes. But.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'd like to move on. Can you hold your question for later?
May I just make a comment on what Zach has said? I'll be quick. I just wanted to say that I agree with you that we don't need to redo the process that you've done. But I want you to know that even the brief explanation you gave now was very helpful, and for me anyway, and just feeling like I know a little bit more about how these decisions were made. And I also respect that you don't want to comment on a specific person in a role, but I think that your explanations about how things may be working or structured or not are really helpful for us to feel like we're making the right decisions and to get behind them. So I appreciate the bit of information, even though it's hard conversation to have.
Good, well spoken, Pip. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy, just the very briefest comment. If you found a way to include all of these requests, a year from now, we'll be back here and we'll have another list.
That's true, too.
It may not next year be quite as lengthy as this list, although I bet it would be close, because I know that there are other things that we've been discussing over the last couple, 2 or 3 years there will always be such a list, but there cannot always be 10 or 12 new positions added. I mean, maybe, certainly if that's where the community, but the role that I think we're supposed to play helps you not try to add 10 or 12 positions every year, because I think we've put together a responsible budget that meets the needs of kids to the extent that, I mean, there's a lot of things. I want a swimming coach, and I want a new pool, and and I don't mean to say that I'm picking bad examples, because I don't mean to say things that are frivolous. I just mean there are always priorities and things that we'd like to add, and things. I think our kids are safe. I don't think we absolutely have to have that 40% of a nurse in order to keep kids safe and healthy. Could we use that?
Absolutely.
We use all kinds of nurses.
Sure.
I mean, they add so much value. Social work, I can have a social worker in every building. Every building has a social worker.
Yep.
And I hope you'll get there someday. But this isn't the cycle that we can add for more. You know what I mean? So I just tell you, I think that list would reproduce itself in a different way next year.
Okay, we're going to move on. Liz, we're moving
Nancy,
on.
I'm just concerned that Nathan's the one saying that this isn't the cycle. I think the board needs to be given enough information so that
Okay,
we
we have
decide,
enough
not city council,
We have
not
enough
city council what we want to present. I think the board needs to know what other positions are we not seeing here today
have
and
them all listed
why
here,
we
Liz.
should keep these positions.
Okay,
Like,
we're not
I
gonna
think we
do
need
that,
some
Liz.
more information, and I don't know how Zach wants to do it. I think it's good hearing from Zach, but I'd like to hear from more information like people have requested about the nursing position or the nature-based position.
all here, Liz.
We need to be able to make, I don't have enough information. I'm sorry, I don't. And I think we need to make a decision. I feel like the school board is getting bypassed right now. The city's making a
Okay,
decision.
let's move on to the next item on the agenda, please. Ways to think about equitable budgeting.
All right, let me pull that up real quick. So this was a conversation, I think, when I was interviewed. This was a dialogue that was going on. I think I might have been asked about it in my interview, or one of them, about this idea about how do I think there was a concern about schools within systems. How do we think about the having equitable schools, and in particular in this part, because we're in budgeting, how do we think about equitably budgeting between schools, between kids? What are the types of things you should look at in terms of thinking about that? But it really was when I came in, or when I was watching you from afar, and we were all in the courting process. There was this conversation about program between schools, and I think one of the things that might have been part of that conversation was outdoor education and who's got it and who doesn't, and that type of thing. I think I watched the school board meeting that was held in this room. Where that was part of the conversation, and part of the dialogue was, do we have equitable? Are our schools equitable? So I think it's worth thinking about that as a broad thing about whether or not we have. We are being fair in the way in which we're allocating resources between our schools. So I want to give you a couple of different ways to think about that and give you some data for you to chew on. And one is you could think about just equal distribution of funds between schools and between kids. You could think about staffing and use that as your frame of reference. You could think about the need at particular schools and whether or not that should influence how much resource is going to a particular school. And you could come back to this idea of program alignment as a means of creating equitable schools. So if you look at the first one, if you think about this through funding, two different ways I think you can think about slicing it, and one is by building and one is by student. So we gave you a couple of different data sets to look at, and this one starts with the FY24 budget, the operating budget that you're sitting in now. And it looks at buildings, it looks at enrollment of those buildings, it looks at the percentage of students who are in those buildings, and then the overall budget, but that is with a caveat. So we had to use a certain methodology for what are we going to include and what are we not. So Nathan, do you want to talk about that?
So briefly, let me tell you that you had a presentation your last meeting, or 2 meetings ago, I guess. Last meeting? Out of district tuitions and services 2 meetings ago. That whole cost center 165, that whole budget, remove that. Doesn't really fit at the building level allocated against all of the students, so I excluded that. We don't budget for health and dental on a body-by-body basis and actualize. We've talked about the fact that we have the health stabilization fund, so we budget a rolling trend of rate increase. And across the board, there are some other things buried in Cost Center 100, your benefits, system benefits. They backed that out. But that's big. I mean, but health insurance is $9+ million, right? So I backed out of-district tuitions. I backed out the health and the other benefits. Taxes and retirement related to specific salaries, cost center by cost center throughout the buildings, that's all still in there. But the overhead component. And then if you consider your financial report, now new board members only seen it once or twice, but the financial report that we've looked at, it has as its last major section operations, which is school board, the telephone lines, Kenny's facilities stuff. Some of that obviously is attributable, and I could track it to buildings, but this analysis didn't seem to care about the electric bill, because it's fair and reasonable and is what it needs to be in every building regardless. So one building's more efficient than another in terms of energy, heat, gas. So although we've included, if you look at that section of your financial, technology's in there. We have included technology because that has a direct impact on the delivery of instruction in the classrooms for students. But all of that other overhead, we backed out. The net result of that is that this figure, no, wait, let me say one more thing. We have added in some of our special revenues and our federal funds. So IDEA, federal funds for special ed, and Title I, which has some teachers. We've just seen some of the comings and goings. We've added in those. So this analysis was based upon a total. Your budget today is just over 60 million. Your proposed budget as it stands right now in your book is 63-something million. This analysis contemplated $66 million worth of spending because of all of the other things added in. But then we've backed out these big categories of health and other benefits, the out-of-district tuitions and the district level operating, and that's backed off to this 43 million in the current year. When you see the next slide, it's 45 and change in the subsequent year, the proposed. That right now is about 68% of total spend. So to give you a sense, we've backed out a little less than a third of overhead stuff. So when we consider this equity, resource equity, building by building, and there's people involved, there's stuff, the operating stuff that the kids have, the photocopiers and computers and paper and crayons and you name it, that's what's here. But the high level, district level stuff has been backed out. That make sense?
I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
Yes. So you took these. You took PHS,
Yep.
and then you went through all the cost centers, art, performing arts, blah, 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 move that into these buckets if
Yep.
they were attributable to a specific school, and that's the numbers that we have here. And the things that weren't really attributable to a specific school or are not. And that is about 20 million.
So within, correct.
Okay.
Within, it's about 20 million. So what I can say is that there's a small amount in the buildings and in technology, et cetera, that I broke out by enrollment because it's still district-wide. Like, we don't buy computers for a building, we buy computers. So I attributed that, I allocated that out based on this level of enrollment so that you'd see how it's really benefiting kids today. And that's today's enrollment, or a week ago. It's current enrollment rather than a state figure from end of year or beginning of year. That's the right now. To try to calculate that for you.
I think this is a publishable analysis.
If we had taken that, by the way, if we'd taken that other 20 million, the best I could have done would be to divvy it up over this equally. So it wouldn't have changed your percentages and your real outcome because the assumption would have to be it's just benefiting each kid equally. So.
Liz.
I just want to say I appreciate this. I think it lays a good picture. I mean, as well as the following slides that were in the packet tonight, gives a good picture as far as equity. My concern, though, moving forward, as far as how we use these numbers, I would really like those numbers put back in for the redistricting committee and have that full information for the redistricting committee so that we see per capita for a kid, how it is operating all these different schools, so that we can have real conversations going forward about what other districts have done as far as having K1 at one school, and so we were able to have those real conversations. So I appreciate the time and everything that goes into it. I guess I would just ask, and if we need a motion at some point, I would say, it'd be great for the redistricting committee to have those numbers too, with those numbers back in that include those overall overhead costs as well.
Okay, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Liz. Anyone else? Byron?
Thank you. Yeah, the question I had, Nathan, was, so it shows the current enrollment, which is today's numbers, but I'm assuming that the budget numbers are for the 2025, right? So these don't include like the ESSER positions. Those have been like the ones that we're talking about are going away.
So in 25, it's pegged against what's in your binder.
It's in the binder. Okay. But the enrollments is current enrollment.
It's correct.
Yeah, we didn't roll.
We didn't roll forward. That's
Okay.
a good point.
Fair.
Thank you.
Doable.
No, I just
Definitely doable,
yeah.
but we didn't.
So just in terms of how, and I'm sure you figured this out, is the blue column, they're organized top to bottom. In this case, overall budget from the numbers that Nathan's talking about. So the high school being our most expensive cost center overall, down to New Franklin, and then as you move into. If you then take that and you break it out into per pupil, and again, if you go out, there are per pupil numbers that we've shared with you in the past that are state level comparisons. Remember, this is the Nathan concoction methodology for this purpose only. So these will not be apples to apples numbers. If you go and do some Googling and look at state numbers, we've given those before for the district. But so just this is more as a comparison from building to building. But you see how you almost turned the last chart on its head, right? Where now you look, and now New Franklin is the highest per pupil spender, and you get down to the high school as the lowest per pupil spender. Now, some of that is just through, we're able through economies of scale at the high school to accomplish some things that we're not able to do in some smaller buildings. And then some of what you'll see too is when we get to later on, where some of the concentrated need is in terms of some groups of students as well, which has an impact too. This is 25. This is the per pupil number in 25. And for those at home, I'll give you the quickie back and forth here, where basically, under the proposed budget, we'd be up about $500 a student across the district, but the relative position of things basically stays the same.
So I have a question.
Yep.
Going back to the 25.
Yes.
So I'm looking at like the percentages. So like in New Franklin, we're looking at 10.62% for percentage of PSD, but the percentage of the budget is 12.62%. And looking at the other elementary schools, it seems a little lopsided compared to the enrollment. What would attribute to that? I'm assuming maybe like the percentage of kids in special ed programs or other programs in each school is going to kind of up budgets for that. But is there anything else contributing to that percentage going up, like for New Franklin compared to Dondero?
I can't speak with enough accuracy to this question, but go ahead.
Just a
But I think the quick answer is the socioeconomic, because I've got Title I monies and other things that benefit New Franklin that don't benefit, for instance, Little Harbor, because there are factors at play that add supports to the building.
So in terms of Title I, and I'm sure, I think you know this, but Title I is, targeted federal program targeted by students who. Originally, it was around lesser means. Now it's around students who potentially could struggle. It's still lesser means. And based on some statistics, free and reduced lunch being the most prominent, whole schools can be eligible to utilize Title I funding, or specific parts of a school might be eligible. So here in our district, New Franklin is a Title I school. The whole school is eligible to utilize Title I programming. Dondero can use it in certain targeted ways towards certain students. And Little Harbor is not eligible for Title I. So the allocation that we receive is broken up amongst for Title I is broken up between New Franklin and Dondero, with the majority of it going to New Franklin.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Carrie Pip,
Does this include, and I'm sorry, my computer's not loading, the grant positions that are funded?
Of the IDEA special
Yes, thank
educators and the Title I, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think my question is similar to both of these. Does it include any of the funds that are contributed by the by SAU 50?
Yes, because that's all a revenue side. So this is about how we spend the money.
Okay.
So yes, it includes,
So it's not all coming from our budget per se.
it's not all coming from your budget,
But
correct. I
it
mean,
is
it's
Okay.
not all coming from local property taxes, it's coming from other
And it
sources.
is fair to note,
Yep.
Thanks.
what the city's biggest revenue source outside of property taxes is the SAU 50 tuitions
bill.
for the whole city. So if you look at, you got property taxes, and then SAU 50 tuitions for the entire city is the second biggest revenue stream. So-
But in theory, the way we're spending those, or the way that we're spending that money only impacts the middle school and the high school, not the elementaries.
Let's see, in the 50s tuitions, generally, yes, is one or two
So there's, you
exceptions.
can't, so it's
Or we
really,
can't break
it's
it
really
down.
difficult, and I was going to say dangerous, and that overstates it. It's really hard to tie the revenue stream that way to the spending. The truth is, we have a spending plan for the entire pre-K to 12, and it includes this many students. Part of the way we fund that is with local property tax, part of it is through federal funds, part of it is through out-of-district or SAU 50 tuition income. But the tuition amounts that are paid by SAU 50 are targeted based upon the actual spending at the high school and the middle school, because we have some kids coming in at the middle school level. And so we derive the tuition rate and the tuition bill based solely on spending that benefits kids at those levels. But it doesn't, we don't.
But the money
actually-
doesn't come in,
the
then we
money
go,
doesn't
this
go up,
only
this
can
goes
go to
high school. It
SAU
just
50
comes in to
stuff, you know what I
fund the
mean?
whole thing.
It
Points
goes
to
in the
fund the whole
pot, but theoretically, we try our best to make sure that our spending reflects our commitment to those people who are tuitioning in.
Right. Awesome, it's a great question.
Liz?
Forgive me, I don't have it right in front of me. How do these numbers compare to what SAU 50 is paying for middle school and high school pupils? And I think that's a decision of the board, right? If we wanted to raise those amounts at all to the SAU, right, or no?
So
How is
again,
that situated?
these numbers,
How do they compare? What is an SAU 50 paying for middle school and high
Apples to
school?
kumquats.
But I'd like to know.
No, and I mean, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. Like, this is, again, going back to the per pupil state kind of information we gave. This is not that. And the SAU 50 number is derived in part from the kind of the state level reporting that we would do about how much it costs to run the operation at those different tiers.
And what is the amount right now? Do we have a number?
I can get it for you in just
yeah, I mean, you voted it in October.
21,000.
20, yeah, it's
It's 20. It's over $20,000.
It's over 20,000, but it's, and that's not something you can really, I mean, we bring it to you and you vote it, but it's prescribed by the area agreement, so it's.
Okay, I guess I'm just wondering, like, comparably what we're looking at. Thank you.
Okay, can we move on?
Yes, Madam Chair. Well, moving on. So this is the changes in 25, and that's just per building. Then this is just, outside of that, swirling around are two different specialized programs. PEEP is our preschool program that is specific. It is there for the purposes of educating special education eligible students at the pre-K level. However, the program is designed to be a 50-50, so you have students with educational disabilities and then their non-identified peers. The idea is we're trying to make that program 50-50 in its makeup, although it is there for the purposes of addressing the needs of students with those disabilities. That's PEEP. And then RJLA is Lister Academy, and you see the breakout that particularly at RJLA, it's a more expensive program. It's a specialized program. We have a smaller student body size. We're trying to provide a set of services that are unique, and so the price tag is a higher price tag than what you'd see in the other buildings.
Quick
Lisa.
clarifying question. So the Lister numbers were backed out from the high school numbers because that's technically part of that school community, but none of the numbers for the high school were based on spending at Lister?
I'm trying to remember, because we had 2 different ways, we could have done this
Sorry.
either way, and it's a good clarification. Ultimately, I'm trying to remember if we, this is pulled out.
So it's pulled out, actually, there's an overlap, because there are 16, I think, of these 24 students that are at Lister are currently engaged in
Maybe a course, or, you know, yeah.
that they go to the high school and take, and so there's a proportionate, or I could have prorated RJLA and reduced it to a certain, but because
broadly.
but broadly, no, none of the RJLA costs are in the high school analysis. And remember, RJLA, like PEEP, is a special ed program. Every student at RJLA has an IEP. They're there because at $40-something thousand, this is part of the conversation about out of district. This is a program where we've been able to find efficiencies, keep kids internally, because they would all be in excess of $100,000 each if they were outplaced to a program somewhere else. So PEEP is a developmental program where we do have typical peers that are in the program, but these costs are all special ed costs targeted against the needs of the preschoolers.
And I would say we tried to separate the things out that we could separate out. What we couldn't do is, like, for example, there was no way to look at like CTE programming within the high school as a standalone. It's too intermingled, and it's not. There was no way to pull that out as a separate cost center. So.
Okay, we have Brian, Tish, and Liz.
And this is good for equity purposes, but for cost purposes, our GLA is, there's a lot of kids that pay tuition, right, into the district, so we get.
So our program of the 24 is supposed to be a half a dozen that are paying, and the approved price tag right now is $50,002 or $50,004, $50,200, something like that. Right now that's been a problem of the program, because in the transition from Nancy's retirement, we've got a great director who's doing really well with the staff and with the kids, but he didn't have the same connectivity in the fabric.
Wait, in this case, we're not talking about Nancy's retirement.
No.
We're talking about Nancy, the former director.
You guys remember the former director?
Yeah.
She'd been in the role.
Your hand went towards Nancy. Like Nancy's retirement.
Nancy Roy retired. Nancy had a waiting list, maybe not after COVID, but for when I arrived, she had a really good network of other districts within a 45-minute drive who were waiting to send their kids in, and that has waned right now, and we're reinvigorating the effort. Remember, it's a program that to some extent can and has been replicated by other districts in a way that back when it was PASS, the Portsmouth Alternative Secondary School, there were over 100 students. Then it was the only game in the region, and we really were bringing in people from. We're making money. We're bringing in people from all around. A lot of those schools have been able to replace or reproduce that at home, and so as it stands right now, the budget is targeted though against at least 6 from away.
Who's next? Sorry, Tish.
So my question is, looking at the per pupil, which is double what we have in other schools, which is understandable because of the additional programs, specialty programs. Does that also include transportation, getting the students from wherever they're at to the Lister Academy?
We provide transportation for Portsmouth students.
So that
if they come from away, they bus themselves in, and if they come from SAU 50 communities, they bus themselves in the same way they
do. Okay, but in regards to like us transporting or the kids, are they on just the school buses that would go to the high school? So there's no really additional services that we have to.
No, it's one of the great things. I mean, because when you do out of district programming, while tuitions could easily be here much higher, the big cost very often is transportation.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it's like you're like, I don't know, $30,000 for transportation for the year for a single kid could be, is not outrageous.
So any in-district kid going to the Lister Academy, there's no special transportation. No. It's just the regular.
I don't know that.
I'm trying to think about maybe on the margins.
Yeah, there might be, but I don't know
slightly.
that we have anybody right now that has a transportation element of the IEP.
It's not like a specialized bus.
We might
do a little bit of work to kind of massage bus routes, so we can get kids from this bus route
Okay.
to this, so we get them there, but it's all through our, as far as I know, it's all our
So,
normal bus
okay.
vendor, and we just kind of make it work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Liz.
I have a question, but I just want to follow up with what Tish said, and I just want to clarify. Is transportation backed out of these costs across the board, or are they included in these costs?
They're backed out.
Okay, so any transportation for even our kids is not included in this cost for RJLA
Correct.
right now. Okay, just wanted to clarify that. And then you said we were down for enrollment, that we no longer have a waiting list. So what are we looking at? I mean, are we still looking? This is the current number 24? Are we still looking at 24 enrollment? And what is our capacity? I think this is a conversation we need to have if we're putting all of this money into, and the city's putting all of this money into the Lister Academy at the community campus. And I mean, if this demographic is changing, if people are choosing other programs over Lister Academy for whatever reason, other districts are, and we're losing. I mean, I think you said it was only a half a dozen, so 6 kids. But I just want to talk about. I think that needs to be a bigger conversation. I don't know if today's the day for that conversation, but maybe in the next couple budget sessions, we could talk further about the money that's being spent for Lister through the city council budget and everything that's being put into it, and our enrollment numbers, and where we're at as far as either upping those to create more revenue and more folks going to the school and utilizing that space, or down. So I don't necessarily want to talk about that now, but I just wanted to maybe follow up at that at some point. And then my next question was, as far as PEEP goes, is there any cost for students that are coming into that program that are city residents? I mean, they're all city residents. Is there any cost for city residents that don't have children that are on an IEP or 504? And is there minimal cost or no cost?
Well,
There's a small, not small, I don't think it's I should back up. Remember that the developmental preschool isn't a daycare that runs from 6 a.m. when you want to go to work until 5 p.m. when you get out of work.
Yeah.
It doesn't run on Fridays. It runs 4 days, Monday through Thursday, and it's a limited experience. And so it's not in the aggregate. It doesn't look like you're going to Rye Day School or you're going to, I wish I could, Optima.
Yeah, the community campus.
It's not. It is it's not intended, I think, to be a subsidized rate, but it is.
But I mean, we're missing Head Start in Portsmouth right now. Head Start went away at the community campus, and I think this is, unfortunately, we may have a greater need because Head Start is now gone. And so, but we also have kids that are not on those. And so I guess I'm just wondering, are those families paying? And I think we need to have a further conversation about PEEP and capacity too. I mean, I'd like to have that conversation at some point.
Okay, we'll do that.
Okay.
Let's move on. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks.
Moving along. So then if you want to look at, all right, we looked at money and trying to think about money if you thought about staffing. So I wanted to bring back something that we had shared in the fall, just with updated numbers, which is around the number of classrooms and the number of students per classroom in each of these spots across our 3 elementary schools. So this set is K through 2, and then the next one rolls into grades 3 through 5. I mean, it helps you see a couple of different things. I think, for me, one is, we don't have the same number of, depending on what's going on with student population sizes across schools and within schools, we don't have necessarily the same number of 3 kindergartens, 3 first grades, 3 second grades. It really depends. We do some shifting around depending on numbers, and that looks different from school to school, and it also looks different from grade level to grade level within schools as principals make choices about how to best allocate the resources they have and to address the needs of the most kids. We know, Dundaro's up there at 22, 21, and we talked about the fact that was, that we started, I think we went into the summer, and I'll walk it back if I'm off, but I feel like we were 18, 17s as we went into the summer, and we were like, ooh, it's higher than we want it to be in K, because we'd like it to be even K, we'd really like this to be K's your smallest class sizes, and then you're slowly kind of building over time as kids developmentally are more independent as we slowly go along. But we had already established what we were doing with these other classes, and then we got this influx that kept coming. I remember Kate Callahan would, leave me a message and be like, Karen got 2 more today, Zach, and this would kind of be throughout the course of the summer as they were getting increasingly stressed about, this was becoming a bigger and bigger thing. But then you will notice as you go, then it's like, well, that doesn't mean that Dondero is bursting at the seams at every single grade level. So, you, depending on how we're allocating stuff in the second grade, you had groups of 15 and 14. And if you look on this chart, you go, oh, geez, well, look at New Franklin at the second grade. Wow, they're in the 14s, 13. New Franklin's got it pretty good. But then as you move over into the upper grades, then you got New Franklin and 21, 20s, whatever, your kids. So I think, and then in Dondero, really what we were hearing from were really two grade levels that were the source of concern from folks at Dondero, and it was kindergarten and 4th grade. And you see that we're in the 20s, higher than we want to be. But when you break out and you look at these based on just on average class size between buildings, you start seeing that some of the conversation that sometimes we get into as a public without seeing the data could make this feel like, oh my God, I think I've had this conversation with people on the street. Like, why are there so many, why are there all these, it wasn't empty classrooms, so it was half empty classrooms at Little Harbor, and, Dondero's bursting at the seams. Well, once you start looking at it, it's like, well, yes, there's comparatively less students per classroom at Little Harbor, but this is not Little Harbor coming in at 15 and Dondero coming in at 20. That doesn't mean it's not something we want to deal with and adjust and tweak and try to get as precise as we can in terms of the distribution of where students are. But it is not necessarily as bad as sometimes the public dialogue is. I'm sorry.
Lisa.
I don't know if this is something you know off the top of your head, but I'm curious as part of this conversation if there's a certain tipping point. Because we've seen across all the schools at different points where they're like, okay, now we need 4 classrooms in 5th grade this year, and when they were in 4th grade the year before, there were only 3 classrooms because there were different educational needs or the just bigger number of people. Is there any tipping point where you look at it to make that decision to move a teacher up or down a grade, or is there any way process that people use?
And I think about this when we were just having the conversation about just budgeting in general, is there isn't necessarily a single, and I know you're not saying this, but it's not like an algorithm, right?
No.
It's okay, so now I've got X number of kids, I got X number of teachers, so one thing I need to consider is that. But then I need to consider, who are the kids? Who are the teachers?
Mm-hmm.
How long have they been doing what they do? Who does well with, this is the mix of kids and the types of needs that are within that set of kids. Who can I best pair up with, in a given year, a principal might make a decision where I'm going to decide that I'm going to have only 3 sections of 3rd grade. I'm going to have 4 sections of 2nd grade, and the numbers are not terribly dissimilar overall between the totals, but I know I've got 3 really strong veteran people in the 3rd grade, and I know the makeup of the kids and the needs, and so as a result of that, I think I'm going to have, and I know there's going to be 3 or 4 more kids per class in the 3rd grade, but I'm pretty sure my staff is going to be able to handle it. And I know this other group who either the needs of the kids are more, or I've got teachers who are earlier in their careers, and I'm going to move them in there. So it really depends on, there's so many variables that go into that on the surface, and in some ways, it's like when you start showing this stuff, some of this in terms of, and there was a discussion at some of these schools about, as we shifted, we added an extra section in one grade and removed one in another. There were some people who got upset about some of those moves. And again, I really, not blindly so, but I really rely on principals and staffs having those conversations. And these were in most cases, and there's a spectrum of how collaborative those conversations were among staffs. But in a lot of cases, these were collaborative conversations being, hey, this is who we've got. Here's our class list. This is what we know. What do we think we should do? And then principals were informed through staff and then made those choices. and then had to be the face of those choices, right? And in some cases took a decent amount of heat around those choices, but that's that's we pay them to make those types of decisions. So anyways, it's not. I'm sorry, it's not a clean
I
answer.
appreciate that. I think it's really helpful for people to understand that it's not like you can just take out a calculator and.
Oh my God, it'd be awesome if that's the way this stuff works. It was all just like, yep,
Right.
divide this by that, done, off we go.
Isn't that what artificial intelligence is for?
Yeah, just AI. Just be AI leadership would be great.
One of my kids was in a boisterous bunch, I think is how the principal put it.
So and those are the types of things. So it's like, do we have enough? So let's say the boisterous bunch. Do we have enough of a concentration of the boisterous bunch that it would be comparatively advantageous to dilute the boisterous bunch, right? I mean, and those are the types of kind of conversations we're trying to have sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, Byron.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear. I think the nuance around like the veteran teachers and where they're placed. I think it's a really interesting perspective, and I don't know that I totally internalized that aspect of this before. At the same time, there obviously is a level of like mathematical calculation that goes into the equitable distribution. Yep. So I think I want to push back a little bit on saying that this is like entirely an art form and I don't think that's what you're suggesting, but I do want to push back a little bit on that concept. And I think that, I mean, just to do basic naive arithmetic, like if you take the 65, you split it into 4 classes, you're still above some of the other class sizes at some of the other schools, and I think that's pretty clear and like easy for anyone to do. And I think the acute feeling that the people in those schools with those kids in those classrooms are having, shouldn't be overlooked, and I think it's important to be understood. So I just want to make
totally.
that,
Let me just totally endorse everything you just said. Yeah. I don't want to overstate there is no science to this at all. It's all art. It's not true. And one of the things I think we're trying to grapple with, and I think this will be as we look at it deeper and we try to make long-term decisions about lines about where people are going to go, is how much of these are bubbles and how much of this is a long-term trend. Yeah. So if we chase, if we chase a short-term trend, and then within 3 years, people live in different areas, and and this like kindergarten thing was a bump. Now we've made it worse, and potentially, and not only that, it's going to be a big deal if we decide that we need to redistrict, and then we spend a bunch of time talking about redistricting, and we're going to families who for 25 years, our family's been a blankety blank kid, and we're saying we totally hear you, and because we think there's a long-term trend towards there being, what is that mark? 4 kids, 3 kids, 2 kids? Your family needs to re-enculturate to another part of the town. Those are going to be really tough, challenging choices, and they're going to be based on, in some cases, imperfect projections. We will have the data we have. We will have, so we're going to sit down. I was just talking with Peter Britz in planning, and they have a point person on kind of housing projections. Howard, who's going to come in and sit with our group and have some conversation about what do they think, but what they're going to tell us is, here's what might happen, and here's what we think the price point is. Here's where we think these things, when we talk to people and we help them refine what the project was, this is what we had in our minds about who the people might be that might inhabit those spaces, but the market's going to dictate who inhabits those spaces. And I'm waiting for, I really can't tell you, Zach, who's going to live, at the place behind Yokins. I really can't tell you who's going to be, whatever. This is what we think when we helped 3 years ago, the developer, alter the specs. This is what we were hoping the outcome might be, but that was in a different environment, and we don't know what's going to happen once you free those properties up into the market. So all those. But that idea would be that if there is a long-term trend, then we absolutely want to adjust things to be in a position where we have, equitable class size in our buildings for sure. And I'm not trying to diminish what the folks that were associated with Dondero and the concerns coming into this year were feeling. Absolutely not. So.
Okay, can we move on? Thank you. And thank you, Byron.
So I'm not going to go, here's what,
No,
sorry.
It's fine, I'll ask a question later. It's
Okay, so here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to go, you've had this stuff, I'll go really slowly, so if people at home on YouTube after want to like replay or they want to go to the agenda listing and see it themselves, what we did is we tried to give you a breakdown within certain categories of what are the number of people that inhabit certain roles at certain buildings. And I think as you go through, you're going to see these, like, there's unique things. Well, that building has this, but this one doesn't. There's situations where sometimes you're like, geez, I don't know why that would be the case. But what eventually you get to is at the end, I think the thing that's interesting is around, you get here, and then if you break out the number of full-time equivalents, so, if a person is only with us 8/10 of the time, they're a 0.8 FTE. But if you take those folks, not the bodies, but the full-time equivalents, and then you look at how many students are there per each of these people, this gives you that breakdown, and it's not radically different, I would argue. It is different, but it's not radically different from building to building until you get to the high school where you get that economy of scale. And we have more kids per stuff. But you definitely have within that, you have principals making decisions about what they think works at their particular building, what the specific needs are. There are a combination of some programming needs and then also thinking about that amalgam of what are the different capacities within my staff as I see them right now, and what additional capacity can I add, and how can I do that? Sometimes through a position, sometimes it's through a hire into an existing position. But people are making a variety of different choices. Now, paraeducators, a lot of that is driven, special services is driven by IEPs. So some of that stuff is not necessarily principal choice. This is IEP teams. We talked about this around out-of-district placement when Rick Maddie was here before. IEP teams making choices about what types of roles are necessary in order to fulfill the services that are needed for students to achieve their IEP goals. But you get the gist. People are making some different choices based on their buildings, but the differences between those buildings are within a similar realm. I will say too, and this will come sometimes with middle schools, you'd see a little bit of a larger number. I think high school you see this jump to about eight kids per FTE. Sometimes you see a slightly larger jump at a middle school too. Not all the way to a high school, but maybe a little bit more than where the middle school is similar to Little Harbor and Dondero. But one of the things you'll see when we get to looking at the makeup of the student bodies is that you'll see a higher proportion of students in free reduced lunch status at the middle school compared to some of the other schools. You're going to see students with some specified needs that are part of our student body at the middle school. So I don't know if anyone, before we move to some of those stats, if anybody has any questions about this.
Brian has a question, and then Pip and Liz.
Yeah, it wasn't on any specific slide, but I think another thing, not to add more work, but another thing would be nice to see is, per kid per square foot, because one thing that's not wrapped up in here is capital a little bit, as we were talking about before, but it does seem like equitable space.
Sure.
It seems like a thing, and I'm making presumptions, but is recess time all the same, or lunchtime, and all those things of transitioning to, I don't know how you could quantify those, but those things affect, and those transitions during the day affect things, and the school, lunchroom's really tiny, then you have to have like
multiple
5 sets of kids in
lunches,
there. So just those kinds of things would be.
I think that I think the using some of these numbers to try to create some type of comparative cost per square foot, we could probably pull that off. I mean, it's all going to, and of course the caveat would be, it's what do these numbers actually represent, and they are where they are within all these constraints. And I know Liz had talked about earlier this year cost per square foot, and so we can do that. It gets a little harder to quantify with a dollar amount, like transitions and space. So we can talk about those things a little bit, you know, and I think this idea of like lunches and what is the lunch breakup between each of the different schools and how many transitions does that add for students as a result of, we might be able to come up with something like that too without a huge amount of work.
Okay. Who was next? Kerry? Oh, no, Kerry. And then Liz.
I have two quick questions. Are the RJLA teacher or staff members included in here anywhere?
No.
Okay.
Not necessarily. No.
Nor PEEP for that matter.
And nor is PEEP.
Okay.
Did I add a slide? Did I not do a slide? Wait, I got to peek to see what I got.
I don't see one
No.
for staff.
We can do that. We can bring that back.
That's
for you.
fine. I understand how it wouldn't necessarily fit into these categories.
Okay.
I just wanted to know if they had been included in one of the sections. And then the other thing I just wanted to note, and I'm curious about, is the paraeducators' numbers don't seem to make so much sense to me, because you would think if you had 3 schools coming together, you would have, you know, like triple the number of paraeducators that we have in each elementary coming
Yeah.
into the middle school.
So
And beyond. And
so,
I know we've talked a little bit about this.
And I would have to have, so let me say generally from my experience what happens, and leave open the possibility that there's something unique in Portsmouth that has not been my experience in other places. But generally, you know, if students have a one-on-one or a group paraprofessional, I mean, the goal is over time is to be doing the work with the student that leads to them being able to over time not need that paraprofessional. Paraprofessionals should work their way out of a job effectively, with the idea being that as we get to the high school, we want to have students in a position where most of them are not, depending on the nature of their disability, a lot of them are not going into the world with someone from a community resource who's going to be with them all the time. They're on their own. And so very often we're working on plans where we're trying to get students to the point where we can peel away those layers of kind of people support as we try to move students closer and closer to being, you know, ready to operate independently as they move off into the world. Some students will be with us, you know, on that journey. Some students will be with us through age 22. Depending on the nature of their disabilities. But yes, so I would expect that we would have higher numbers of students who have paraprofessionals attached to their plans at the lower grades, and then they slowly will be weaning off as we went forward. So.
That does make sense to me. It worries me a bit, because it does seem to reflect what I'm hearing anecdotally out of the middle school, which is that there's sort of this attempt to combine kids with paras, and that each kid is not getting the support that they are due per their IEPs.
Okay.
So
I can't speak specifically to that.
because it happens to match that,
Right.
you know,
Right.
trend that I'm hearing about.
And I think there is I can't evaluate whatever the individual situations were. I know I've been in enough of those conversations over my career that when we start to engage dialogue about, like, look at the success there's been on these goals for this student, maybe it's time to start to pull away some of these additional services. That is an unbelievably scary moment for parents sometimes. And so that, and as we pull away some of that stuff, there can be an initial stumble for kids, and then they get their feet too. And sometimes they don't, and then we got to bring it back. So those are, I would say those are really hard comments, but I can't assess. I've not been part of middle school IEP meetings over the course of the last 18 months, so I can't assess those.
Liz.
I just want to revisit, and I think it's within this as talking about arts too, and I didn't bring it up in the beginning, but there was a request for a 20% increase to an elementary and high school percussion teacher. And just from my own understanding is that during COVID, our arts department took a real loss with having 5th graders and new students coming into the band and percussion programs. And And so this was the first year my son got to be involved at the middle school. Instead of having a performance like they usually have a holiday performance, they had an informance, and they were able to show what they've done in their program. Unfortunately, though, I believe it was the teachers that were doing the percussion section, and that was because my understanding is that because Mr. Cirillo, who's our current performing arts coordinator, based on all the roles and everything that he needs to do as far as setting up performances, and I think he really does a lot. I mean, from what I see from social media and whatnot, there's a lot of setup that is required for these performances. He's going around to all the different schools. He's, manual labor with pulling out risers and maybe having old risers, maybe needing some new equipment. But he's really doing a lot. And I think my concern is that we're going to be losing him in that position, and therefore we're going to be hiring for that position. But he is highly experienced in percussion. And Portsmouth has made a name for itself, and I don't know if many people know this, that are, if they don't have children in the schools or whatnot, but since my time, I was graduating class of 05, since my time as a sophomore, we began winning world finals in percussion ensemble for concert and open class percussion. And so we were competing against other schools around the United States. And so Portsmouth has really made a name for itself against, Bill Ricca, I remember, was a really great percussion ensemble. And so we've competed, and this has been a tradition. And my concern is that traditions like this, with budgets and everything else, may be going by the wayside if we don't fund these positions. And I'm concerned that even this 20% request is being denied because we don't know what we're going to get with a performing arts instructor, and unfortunately our performing arts coordinator, and our performing arts coordinator was spending his time doing this percussion position for the elementary schools, and now we don't have any percussion for the 5th grade, and so there's going to be the 5th grade, that burden is now being placed on the middle school teacher to teach children percussion, but also I think we're losing kids. My son loves percussion. I was paying for him to go to PMAC to do percussion, and I said, I really want you in band. And I put him, he chose the clarinet, but he doesn't love it. He loved percussion, but unfortunately we don't have a percussion teacher to be able to be there in that position. So I'm worried that this tradition, I think traditions are important sometimes, and Portsmouth has really made a name for itself in the percussion field, and I think it's a little bit, and we've brought a lot of attention to Portsmouth and our excellence in that area. And so I'm a little bit concerned, even if it's a 20%, that we're not funding a position that has really been a tradition in Portsmouth to fund percussion. And we were world champions for many years in this area. And I highly recommend anybody that hasn't heard or gotten caught up with what Portsmouth has done in percussion. We were sponsored by Vic Firth, which makes drumsticks. I mean, we've had, and I think the Portsmouth Music Club, the Parent Music Club, has really funded this. So I don't know how much funding is being put back on the schools or how much is really being requested of our budget to really fund this huge experience and this huge outreach by Portsmouth, that we're able to be sponsored by Vic Firth and do all this. And so I'm a little bit concerned that, this simple, small request of 20% increase so that we can have percussion instruction in our elementary schools is being essentially denied at this point. And so I really want to consider what the next person is going to bring in and fully funding that position. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Can you continue with the slides?
Yeah.
Oh, Lisa.
I just wanted to follow up really quickly on the paras, because I think when we had the discussion about out-of-district tuition, and I kind of came in at the end and was saying I'm curious about how these numbers break down. I think what I'm really asking about is the equity and also whether kids have enough resources across all of the buildings to have the support that they need. And I mean, I've heard anecdotally some of the same things that Pip is hearing, and I know sometimes the people that you talk to, that's not always the full picture. But I think that's why I'm sort of curious at some point to revisit that idea, because there has
Rick's
been conversations.
been working on something for you. I mean, our plan is to bring it to the next meeting.
Because I think that it's an awesome goal to have kids peel back services, and absolutely an awesome goal to have them by the time they graduate from high school be as independent as possible. And certainly the more you can scaffold that as they go up through the grades, that totally makes sense. But there does seem to be some tension right now about how we're pivoting in the middle years away from support and whether it's the right balance all the time. And I'm not trying to say that to be overly critical, but just to have the conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Can you move on to the next?
I can. I'm moving. So then, and then just by need. So just a couple of different things. And this is not. There's so many ways in which you can think about need, but to give you three kind of snapshots to think about our student bodies. This is our. In each building, the yellow represents the percentage of students who are identified as a need of having special education services. And you see, PMS and New Franklin slightly outpacing the other schools. But also that this percentage, I would say, compared to some other places, the percentage of identified students is lower than in some other places. And I think there's a lot of research that would point to, if not a correlation, if not a true connection, some type of correlation between socioeconomic status and sometimes the percentage of students who are identified. And if you look, and I should have kept the piece of pie over the other direction because you can see the similarities. But this is free and reduced lunch eligible between schools. Once again, PMS and New Franklin, a little bit ahead of their the other schools. And then interesting, we have a different type in terms of our English language learner population, or this would, for some of you, English second language learners, but our ELL population, or English learners, depending on where you are. I think English learners is the most modern nomenclature on this. What's interesting is that Little Harbor, which is does not have our highest amount of students who are free and reduced lunch. In a lot of places around the country, there's, again, second language learners, there is a correlation with people's socioeconomic status, and that's not the case at Little Harbor. So it's kind of a unique situation in terms of what that population looks like. Yeah.
Just curious how this is measured. Is it like their native language, or is it their competency?
So
they
that's a
need
good question.
support in language or not?
And this is students who, I think this is correct. This is students who are assessed and then need support.
Yes.
Thank you.
But there's an actual, it's the access test?
It's the access test. They're actually going to start taking the test this week to determine what level, and there's a number of levels at which they need support. There's intensive support. There's students who are just on monitor, that they've developed enough proficiency with English to not need direct instruction anymore. So it's a gradual release model where you're spending a lot of time at the beginning when they're first learning, and then less and less over time. So that's what it measures, is the ones who need the support.
One more silly question, if I can. Is this separate from IEPs?
Yes.
Although you could have students who
You could have both.
That have both,
But these numbers are different.
But these are, these do not, it's a good question.
So if they have learning
So they
delays
might
in
have special
classroom-
services, those special services are language-based, but they're not connected to an education. Being a second language learner is not considered a educational disability. It'd be a separate category. Even though some districts, to confuse things, they'd run their English language learner programming under the umbrella of special services. We don't, but some do. And so that can be confusing sometimes for folks.
Byron and then Lee.
So something that I thought was interesting on the free and reduced lunch slide was that the sort of drop off at the high school level. And I'm just curious a little bit in terms of if there's an understanding of the cause for that, because
yes,
it looks as though to educate me a little bit there. Yeah.
So there's two different ways in which you can qualify for free and reduced lunch.
Okay.
One is through something called direct certification. So direct certification, usually you are part of another federal program like food stamps. You're part of some other poverty-based program. You've been identified already through some federal process. You don't need to apply. And then there are also a band of folks who are potentially eligible for free and reduced lunch, but have to apply to demonstrate that they would be eligible. They weren't picked up through the sweep of the federal programming. And so what you see as you go on is kids, and I haven't done a deep dive in the data here, this is traditionally across most schools in the country though, is that kids who are those choice kids, who the parents are applying, once they get into middle school and high school, are more socially aware of, and other kids are getting more savvy about who's getting what food and where are they getting the food and how does that work.
So they're sort of
Kids-
opting out. Like
Kids are basically opting out or feeling stigmatized. Now, I've been in systems where there's, the worst of these setups are there's a line that's like the line that all the kids figure out is where the kids who are on free or reduced lunch go, and some other kids go and they pay for a hot lunch. But then there's the classic would be, and then there's like an a la carte section. That's your cookies and your pizza slices and your whatever, and those are pay kids. And people start figuring out over time who's going where, and then those students in some cases start saying, "I don't do it. Don't, mom and dad, don't do it." So one of the things that some districts have moved towards is towards things like, and this is Councilor Bagley has asked about this at the city council level. What would it cost for us to pay for all kids' food? And we, on the legislative committee, we've talked about what's the ability for the state to provide food for kids. Because there are some places that move to, they call it's community-based meals, where everybody's getting the same stuff.
Yeah.
And then there is no stigma attached, and we're all in this together, and the best of scenarios, it's like locally sourced food, it's organic stuff, it's all those types of things. It's all available to all kids. That's like here. Right now, we balance most places. A lot of school districts balance their food programs, count on the a la carte money to make the budget work. And so your pizza kids and your whatevers are paying for some of making the rest of it go, because we're only eligible to reimburse so much money based on federal food programs. All right, feel free to clean up any of that.
No, I think,
Okay.
what I will tell you is that we have just as a follow-up, we do have an element budgeted in the general fund to cover deficits in the program.
Yeah.
Because if I gave you an example, Exeter High School is out in the middle of nowhere, and kids stay on campus, and those a la carte kids support. In Portsmouth, we have an open campus, and there's lots of things readily available. So our food service program doesn't generate quite so much support that way. And as a result, prior to COVID, we ran some pretty healthy deficits. It's been better the last couple of years. Well, that's not true. Last year, it was federally funded. This year, it's better. But I think we'll return to the deficits because we run a decent program, try to find efficiencies, but manpower is expensive, material are expensive, and we just don't have the participation rates that you might want.
In different districts around everywhere, I was in a district where the tradition had been the program was totally self-supporting, and so you would it would be this self-contained kind of ecosystem that would pay for itself. But more and more, places are finding that hard to do, and now, there are folks who are trying to budget. The other thing that happens too is, in our process of trying to do outreach to families who may be eligible, if they go through a period of time where we're not denying the food to kids, and then they eventually become eligible, we can't go back and then charge the feds for that money. We just got to eat it. You know what I mean? So anyway, so there's layers to that, but yes, it does tend to go down at the high school because of kids basically opting out.
Thank you.
I think Lee had his hand up, and Brian and Liz.
So two quick questions. One is, are the staff numbers here, or are they prior to the 5 positions being withdrawn from it?
So the 20, where are we here? The ones, I'm trying to think of the ones I just showed you. This is, God, I'm trying to think about it now. This is,
I might be able to make it easy on you if you actually go to, what is it, slide?
I think this is this year.
Yeah, because I see a math interventionist at Portland.
Yes, so this is this current year. What you won't, there was one thing missing, which is ironic because we were talking about the outdoor educator. And it would be a 0.3, 0.3, 0.3 for outdoor ed across the 3 elementaries. That would be one thing that would change this, and I missed it until after.
Okay. And so my next question, hopefully doesn't come across the wrong way, but why would a math interventionist not work at a Portsmouth high school versus it is working at Portsmouth Middle School, it's working at New Franklin, it's working at Dondero? What's the difference?
Yeah, and I can't at the moment drill down into the specifics of that. I think the conversation I had with the high school principal was just about the way in which it was structured right now. They didn't feel like they got the outcomes that they wanted on the other side. I can definitely do a deeper dive and come back and talk about each of the different interventionists and how they're structured, and give you a better answer. I don't have it right now.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Other than going on what I'm getting from my principal.
Okay. Brian and then Liz.
I thought it was interesting you mentioned the socioeconomic and IEP connection, and if you go back to the free and reduced, it's New Franklin's exactly 20.2%, and then if you flip to the other slide, the you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They actually fall. They're within 1% of each other. Which was interesting.
And that's reasonably typical. Now, that is not to say, and I think it's really important for people in the community to hear, that is not, every one of those kids are not the same kids, right? But if you look at, if you look at big data sets and meta-analysis, they'll talk about, you see these correlations. And that's not to say that being of lesser means is a disability. But our process of identifying educational disabilities is partially connected to where a student is in relation to their peers, and where a student is in terms of, one measure of that is academic achievement in certain areas, and where are they at? Well, if you're reading 2 standard deviations less than your grade-like peers, then you can be considered to have a reading disability. Well, that reading disability might not be due to something that's cognitive. It might be due to life experience. And so there's all kinds of exceptions and differences and unique things to look at as you think about those things. But those are elements that undeniably you see the data, parallel itself in a lot of different places.
Liz.
I just want to follow up. I had a question, but I wanted to follow up to Byron's point about funding lunches. And I just think from an interesting perspective of having lived down south, I remember there was one lunch line that was, and I think a majority of the lunches in the school that I was in were free and reduced lunch. And there was one line that was French fries, burgers, chicken sandwiches, and whatnot. And then there's another line, and if they had Salisbury steaks that day, you might see some more people go over there. But were more traditional type foods like meatloaf or whatever. But every day there was chicken sandwiches and burgers and fries on this one side. And my understanding is they all were qualifying as free and reduced lunch. I know that in the elementary school we have pizza day. So I know that, and I know from having been to the Portsmouth High School, I don't know what the setup is now. I know they have the ability to cook pizza, and they wanted to use that more, and that was kind of a request they had given us before, the ability to sort of have more staff to be able to do those things. But in the past, when I was at Portsmouth High School, we got Papagino's Pizza, which is obviously no longer there. And that was the thing. So I could see, that point of, and I used to take my little couple dollars and buy my pizza and buy my cookies and probably not eat very healthy. But I guess I don't know why that couldn't, aside from using Papagino's, if we actually used our facility, why could not, and maybe this is, I don't really need an answer right now, but maybe something to explore that, we could have one line that has the pizza or cookies or whatever, but whatever components they give you along with it still qualify for free and reduced lunch, and have another line that has, a change up every day of different things. You know what I'm saying? And so I think we maybe we should get a little creative there if we need to, so that we are getting those federal funds. And I think that to the point that I had before, I think, I don't know if there's a position necessarily that's solely focused on getting federal funds or making sure we're utilizing these funds. Maybe that's a strategic planning thing to really make sure we're taking advantage of those things. But I think that's something to look at. I thought it was an interesting slide as far as the English language learners, and I guess it's interesting to see the percentages, but I don't think the percentages give a full picture where, we may need to, I guess I'm curious, and I don't have the budget book in front of me tonight, but I guess I'm curious, how we're managing, like how many different languages do we have at Little Harbor that's really bumping that number up? And does that mean we're paying a half-time position, a part-time position? Are we using outside resources to do that? And what that breakdown might look like. And I don't know if that's a further conversation, but it would be interesting to see what those look like for FTEs to build, and also I think now that I say that out loud, a lot of positions we're funding from contractors and outside sources. So I don't know that those are necessarily being considered as FTEs because we're not funding them in our budget, but we're contracting them out. So I feel like even though we're at we're almost at a stagnant FTE right now, we may actually, and if you really to count the contracted positions, we may be in a higher FTE position. So I don't know how that really plays into presenting the budget, but I think it makes a good point. If we're taking somebody out and contracting them versus having them as an FTE, that might not necessarily show over time of what we've been doing.
All right, I'm ready. Speed round.
Yeah.
Ready? All right.
Sorry.
At Bonnie Eagle High
Not
School
there.
in West Buxton, Maine, it was Lisa's Pizza.
Yeah.
Famous for Old Orchard Beats Pizza. And cookies and the chocolate milk for Mr. McLaughlin every day.
Oh, no wonder we're about the same.
Pretty close. I was just saying, I know that meal. I ate that meal for 4 years. The reason why we don't have some of that stuff is there are very specific guidelines about what qualifies as a federally reimbursable meal. So we have to have certain components on the dish. And you'll see that if you go to cafeterias, you'll see, this was a classic, kids would go through the line and they'd have all these things and then they'd get an apple. They don't want the apple, but they're not eligible. The meal is not federally reimbursable without the apple. So they have to go up to the line, and then we would have a basket. At the last place I worked, there'd be a basket where kids would put the apple they don't want. But they had to go through, they had to have the apple. And as long as we had the apple, boom, federally qualified meal is reimbursable. We get back the X amount of money on the meal. If the kids don't take the apple, not federally reimbursable, we have to pass a federal audit. And there's all this, and there's an ongoing argument all the time with the, who is it? It's not FDA. Who does is it FDA? USDA. There's all kinds of arguments about what qualifies as a vegetable and what qualifies, and so they will go. Every 5 to 10 years, you will see some story on 60 Minutes where they're talking about this qualifies as a federal meal, and this is a piece of pizza, and the tomato sauce counts as a vegetable, and that is a ongoing thing that evolves and changes. And there's intense lobbying at the national level from food companies to make certain things eligible. We also sometimes want certain things to be eligible, like kids will eat tater tots, a lot of them, and we can freeze them, and we can store them, and we can, so there's all those things, but a lot of it is around the burger, fries, Papagino's doesn't qualify for federal reimbursement.
Well, I think the burgers, fries do if they're made in-house. Yeah, and I think so. I guess that's what my whole point is I know there used to be a separate cart for Papagino's, but I don't see why that couldn't be, we could have 2 lunch lines, and one lunch line is making sure, the burger and fries, even though we maybe not want our kids to have that, they actually meet the federal requirements, because I think that there are schools that are potentially doing it. And then as far as the English language learners and the ESL, I don't know if that would make sense to us for us to see how we're spending, or how much we're contracting out, and then how do we think about those contracted out positions as FTEs?
So just the quick one on that is, I think Patty just had, we don't contract.
There's no contracting out for any of the
services with
ELL
ELL. So
no.
This group of people represent our. So we don't have. So what's important is you might have. We just
we
did this.
contract out BCBA though.
The number of the number of primary languages we have. I can't remember. We did this.
26, 27?
Yeah, I can bring it back to you. But what's important to know is, like, if we don't have a staff member who, our ELL people don't necessarily speak that student's primary language. We couldn't staff for all the different primary languages and have, like, we need 2 hours of this and 2 hours of that. So these people, their training is around working with kids regardless of their language and then helping them bridge to English.
Okay.
So,
Carrie?
I just wanted to just appreciate this report because I think that we're really good at asking for like 14,000 different new analyses, but like this I know has been a thing for many years in the district, and I think it's just really helpful for me as a school board member when people are like, well, we don't have this at New Franklin and they have this at, like, to really have the numbers and the context. And so I appreciate getting this report and being able to use it. It's really helpful.
it was good for us to go through the process. It was good internally. There hasn't been a lot of conversation like this, so we shared some of this. Principals helped us develop this, and I think there's some situations where principals like, oh, I thought so and so was getting it way better than they actually got it, and it's like, no, it's not that. So I mean, there are in communities and in organizations that we have kind of stories we tell ourselves about what's happening, and it's good sometimes to have the data to kind of be like, okay, some of that's true, but some is not.
And I think our conversation had been like, we're too worried to do that because that's going to make all of those mutterings worse.
Right.
And I think it doesn't do that, or it gives us an opportunity to really.
And if the mutterings, I agree with you, I feel like the mutterings are not worse by seeing some of this data. But if it was, then that's important to know too. And then we got to respond, right? So.
Lee, did you have a question?
I think you're going to get to it in the thoughts, but if I stand back and I think about how I've had to budget in the past,
yes, from
an equity standpoint, almost every aspect that you've shown us today comes into play in the way that you have to approach this.
Yeah.
There's just no one answer to this, and you have to actually take into consideration all of these.
Well, and that's why you want really skilled principals. You want skilled people who are in a bunch of these different roles. We want to hire the best. If you think about it from a corporate, who are the best middle managers? You want to have those people who are really skillful. They're very thoughtful. They've had a whole bunch of training. They've got good experience. They work well with people. They are on the ground. They're seeing what's happening, and they're making really good judgments about trying to, and it's not perfect, but really good judgments about trying to figure out all these levers at the same time and coming up with the best possible solution based on all those variables. And so, yeah, that's coming. That's coming into one of my last slides, yeah.
Next slide.
I'm going. All right.
Take us home.
Take us home. Boom, boom. So I apologize. In your stuff that was online, you had two PMS. It was getting late in the game when Zach was finishing up the slides, and you had two PMS boxes. You had two little harbors. So we made the corrections on this one. I know what I wanted to do, but I was trying. Anyways, so I think inherent in some of the conversation I had heard as I was coming in, it was this idea about we should just have universal programming across the board. That's what we should do. That would ensure equity. And I think the thing I wanted to point out is that in our system, we are not a totally contained system. So you have these other sets of students coming in. Even if we decided that there was, and I think there is definitely an argument against universal programming amongst our three elementaries. You have these other kids coming in at different grade levels, each with their own school board, with their own priorities that are coming into our system. They have a mega board, the SAU board. But each of these folks have their own boards with their own conversations about what they want to prioritize and what is most important to them. And so they are doing their own thing in some situations. Now, I get back to what we were talking about math and the importance of this math, the coordinator position we were talking about at the high school. So the other day, one of the things we did, which was great, because we have a great partnership with SAU 50, especially because of Steve's former connection here, is that we brought together a bunch of the math teachers from the 9th grade at the high school with a bunch of with the Rye and Greenland 8th grade folks and our own 8th grade folks to say, What are we all doing? Now, we don't even use the same materials. We don't have the same sequencing of what we do. We don't spend the same percentage of time on things. So it was all this just sharing what is happening in each of these different spaces, and how can we best position kids coming from all these towns to all be successful at the high school, and what are changes we're doing at the high school in terms of programming to try to make it all jive. Now, all that stuff, even that conversation wouldn't have been possible without that coordinator person that we're trying to make more permanent, and that's where we're trying to go. But we're not able to make our programming universal across all these communities, and I think that I came from a place where I would have said coming in on my first day, it should be universal across all 3 elementaries. I have evolved in my thinking on that, and it goes to what Lee was saying, where you have some very talented veteran principals who collaborate well with their staffs, who are making decisions on the margins about some things. The core of what we do, we're still offering the same types of, they're not doing their own independent math program. We're in the middle of a math pilot at the elementaries. We've just come to a conclusion about what we're going to use going into the future. They're not teaching English, they're not whatever, but there are some things on the margins that they are doing that they think uniquely fit the combination of the kids, families, and staff they have in their buildings. And I think you want to not give them complete leeway, but I think you also want to be respectful of some of the choices they're making, because the other thing is these are also inherently successful schools. They're not failing. Like, these are schools that are winning right now, and it's just a matter of how much extra do we want to win. But this is, we're in most communities, these schools would be the envy of most other communities around the state, and I would say we want to give some leeway to principals to make choices around what's happening in those spaces.
Okay, Liz, let's try to sum this up.
Just a brief question about that. Is there any conversation around, and I guess I'm curious too, what it means for us. Is there any conversation around, there's some dwindling numbers at some of these other SAU 50 schools, and so it's my understanding that children from Portsmouth, there are children that are tuitioning in to some of these other schools because of the numbers and, maybe the parents' choice to want to go to another school. So I know they're paying out of pocket for their children to go there, but what does that mean for Portsmouth? Do we lose the funding for those children because they're no longer pupils in our schools? And is there any conversation about how many children we may be, quote unquote, losing to the elementary programs at other schools because of their dwindling numbers?
I will tell you, there is not a big, I haven't had one leadership meeting where we've been talking about, oh my God, did you hear about all the kids that went to Newcastle? Or, because it's a place that has a low population right now. So I don't know what those numbers are.
Yeah, I guess I would be curious.
Well, their school just has a low student body, and they're interested. They have on their sign, please tuition your kids to us.
And then what does that mean for Portsmouth, I guess? Do we lose state funding for those children or funding for those children, and what are we losing when that happens? I guess, I'd be curious.
So long term, just when we look at the projections about what we think our student body is going to be over time, if Newington, for example, has a decrease in the number of kids who are going to Newington schools who are feeding into us, then that would be a reduction in the number of tuitions that we would receive, and then we.
Kids that live in Portsmouth that are choosing to go to Newcastle or Newington.
So
I've seen it going on right now.
Anecdotally, that's not a big conversation. I don't know. I can get the numbers for you. I can talk to Steve to get those numbers, but I don't think that's a big thing right now. There might be some, a few here and there.
Well, it is a thing, and it may not be a big thing, but I guess it is a thing, and I guess I'm just curious, as time goes on, and I think Rye has always had this conversation about dwindling numbers and what that might look like. So I guess I'd be curious, maybe the redistricting committee or somebody could look at something like that, what this might look like over time if Rye's numbers continue to dwindle, and they it's almost like they're trying to not so much advertise, but I think there's an appeal to have a smaller class size, so children from Portsmouth may be tuitioning in to those places, and I think this maybe need to be a bigger conversation. Thanks.
We can look at some numbers. Again, it just hasn't been a big conversation.
Okay.
Right next to you.
I'm sorry. That's why I said that.
Just on the enrollments, One of the things that I think I've asked this in the past, but, you know, we have almost 1,000 kids at the elementary, and all of a sudden, middle school is like 500 kids.
Yep.
Right, even though we have Newington and Newcastle coming in. Do we know
What our bleed out is on.
where that bleed out is and why? And is it middle school? Is it just parents deciding to go to private schools? And
I don't have figures for you, and I can try to put that together. I know you have asked about it in the past, and I think one of the things I need to figure out in terms of my time here in New Hampshire is what type of data is available to me. I don't even know the answer to that, in all honesty. So that's something we can pursue. I know there is, anecdotally, I mean, there are kids I know from talking with the administration at the middle school. I mean, there are definitely, you hear about those kids who are like pushing really hard to try to get into Phillips Exeter, right? And so there's a chunk of those kids. How many of those kids we actually lose on a annual basis? I think it's a handful, or it's like, but I'll get the actual numbers. I know there are definitely families who aspire to that at times and try to go through the process of applying to Phillips Exeter. I don't know that we will lose some. We have some kids who might be at St. Pat's, but I'll try to
figure out the 400 kids.
Yeah.
Isn't it the
But it's not. It's not really the 400.
It's, yeah,
Like
because,
3 grades versus 6?
That is true too.
Yeah.
That's true too.
yeah, that's the math I was doing earlier, right? And I
That's
think
what I was trying to figure out.
there's still
There's still a loss. So.
there still is a loss,
Yeah.
but it's not as statistically. It's not like a math. Yeah.
So yeah, I'll see what. And do you know in terms of private school numbers what's available to us on the state level? Or?
There's not a lot because, again, it's like a lot of things in the state, you're not required to report things. So parents will make decisions and there's no mechanism to sort of capture where that information's going. Good example is like people who are homeschooling. There's really no requirement to sort of track that.
They said, well, yeah, in the state here, my previous experience, there was a whole office at the state level that would track homeschool students. Families had to submit a plan. We'd get a report every quarter. This is the number of kids that are on homeschool. Here, you can just send a letter at any point and say, I'm homeschooling my kid.
And once,
that's it.
you make the decision in 2nd grade and
So
it
we
can
don't
stand straight
we
through high
don't
school.
and then there's no expectation from the state or from us that we're tracking you. So
Live free and
Go.
do what you want.
Gentleman with the hand.
So if you take, so I started thinking about numbers, and once in a while, when you think about numbers, you stop listening because you're working. If what I say right now completely repeats what everybody was already saying, if you take the Dondero, Little Harbor, and New Franklin numbers, add them together, divide by 6 grade levels, multiply by 3. You've got 50 more. You get 465.
Yeah.
And we got 484. So was the question where the extra kids coming from?
I think Newcastle is like
the fact that I wasn't
6
thinking
a
about
year.
6th grade.
Okay, that's why I saw that problem in my head. I was like, wait a minute, there's not. The most interesting data point on numbers that I saw in the 5 years I've been here with you is in COVID, we definitely saw a backslide, but the numbers of kids who went to the parochial schools because they were open when we weren't, or they went private somewhere else, or they homeschooled and never came back. There certainly was a drop off and then some recovery. SAU 50 kids tuitioning into us is a number that stayed relatively flat through that experience. The deficit that we saw was Portsmouth, because when we bounced back, our tuition numbers came right back. Obviously, you got cohorts moving through. There's some pockets, but the numbers didn't dive. And when I say dive, I mean 50 to 75 losses were Portsmouth residents, not tuition kids. And I don't know, in all of that conversation about, and that's not elementary, I'm talking high school, I'm talking the tuition level, but.
I was going to say it's elementary. You might have just seen in the paper, Coastal Waters, which is a charter, is closing. And I know we are reabsorbing some of those students. I don't have the numbers yet. I guess no principals are already telling me we'll have some kids back inbound as a result of the closure of Coastal Waters. So
Just their high school.
What's that?
They're only closing their high school right now.
Great.
right now.
Pip and then Liz, and why don't we sum it up after that?
I just wanted to say that I too am still interested in these numbers, but I think I also would love if we can find a way to connect with these families whose kids aren't, mine being one of them, who aren't all in the district.
Yep.
I think that it would be a great idea to incorporate some information from those families into our strategic plan, because it's sort of like an exit interview type thing where we might find out what we're not doing in our district that they're seeking somewhere else.
Yep.
So.
I'll see, like I said, I'll see what I can do on data. And then that other conversation, I think, is an interesting one, because they're saying the same thing. It's that family exit interview, and what does that look like, and how can we start collecting data from that?
Liz.
I just want to thank you for, I think this makes a great point that some of these schools are closing. I think Coastal Waters isn't, I mean, it's a local charter school, but there are schools that I know of that people have gone to in Massachusetts that have now closed programs after COVID and whatnot. But I think Zach makes an interesting point about homeschooling. I did homeschool my son, and I did find it frustrating that there wasn't a direct point of contact for a coordinator. And I know that we have this curriculum position, and so I have seen in districts across New Hampshire that there is a curriculum coordinator that does curriculum across the board that is also a homeschool contact, because homeschoolers are provided a certain amount of rights, which sometimes can include getting a copy of whatever textbook might be being used at the school, and other, and having the children come back for, arts education or sports. And so I think, sometimes you run a risk if you're not, and I think there's more challenges and insurance that is being provided to homeschoolers to challenge school districts in these ways. So I would encourage the district to, not have the superintendent as the point of contact, and maybe we can get creative about having a coordinator in these ways. I know it could be the superintendent or the building principal. There's obviously statutory requirements, but with that said, I think there are some districts that are doing homeschooling properly to be able to keep an eye on these kids. And, I think sometimes you run the risk as, a child might get pulled out and they're homeschooling, but they really may be completely off the radar, and there might be other stuff going on. So I think it's really good to have a point of contact that maybe isn't the principal or the superintendent, that is really following up and making sure that those kids are being accounted for too. So I don't know, maybe that's something creative we can think about later, but maybe that person could also coordinate to understand how many kids are going out of district and whatnot, too.
I think what's challenging is in other states, people have a legal obligation to keep the state educational system and the local school informed. Here, there is zero obligation beyond sending a letter to the superintendent and saying, I'm taking my kid out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so people are not obligated to stay in touch with us, and that's, I think, on my end, my concern is as much a DCYF concern as we don't know where kids are.
Yeah.
And that's just I'm not used to that from the Vermont experience, and this is a new thing, and it's uncomfortable. And when I get a letter, there's no work for me to do. I don't notify anyone at the state. I don't go investigate. I just get a letter, and it's done. And that, as someone who's seen situations where that could, I worry about where kids are. I think there's some wonderful folks who do amazing stuff with homeschooling, and that's not to disparage any of that, but it makes me nervous that the state system doesn't know where its children are sometimes.
I also think they're on the flip side, though. I think there is concern, like, as I follow some parent discussion groups online in New Hampshire too, that there is some concern that schools don't understand that the rights of homeschooling parents to continue to provide certain services, like certain textbooks or after-school programs, or not after-school programs, but like in-school programs, like, if they wanted to get dropped off for art class or whatever. And so to have somebody besides the building principal or the superintendent coordinating that, or kind of would add another layer of that DCYF prevention too, in my experience. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, is there anything else before we discuss our next move?
You don't want to see my next 6-7 slides, Nancy? No, I'm kidding. There's no more slides. There's no more slides.
Got
Okay,
3 hours. Good.
Our next budget meeting is February 6th, the week from tonight, at 6:30 in this room. And what I would like to suggest is we have an agenda meeting on Friday. If the three of us, and Patty and Nathan, Nathan's probably going to be there. If we could come up with the questions that came up tonight, and provide the answers in our Tuesday meeting. Does that sound reasonable to you? Or, I mean, you've answered a lot of them already.
Yep.
But if we could just, because I think what would be nice if we had those answers, if we want to adopt the budget by the 20th, maybe we can really talk about what the budget's going to look like next Tuesday after we get the answers to some of those questions. Do you think that could work? Does everybody think that could work?
So let me editorialize, because one of the things that I think we've seen happen in past cycles, just the last couple, 2 or 3 years, is all of a sudden the end arrives, and people feel like they didn't discuss or ask a question or what have you. You won't have a lot of time, I would propose, on the 13th. You'll have, it's the only meeting of the month. You have a full agenda, just dealing with other housekeeping and other matters. And so we'll make best use of next Tuesday, the 6th. You could vote the budget on the 13th, but remember, there's a limit to how much you can do on the 20th. Hey, now that we're here to the last night, let's create a whole lot of new ideas and new stuff, because you want to come out of the 20th with a budget that can be handed to the city.
And then our ability to monetize on the fly.
Yeah,
Some choices you make might be difficult if it's at that same.
When is it due to the city council, or to Karen?
I'm already too late. When you voted on the 20th, I'm already, they wanted it the previous Friday, but
So
that's
we
all
have to
right.
have it
It's-
by the 20th.
Yeah,
We
so the
have to have
20th
it
is
by
kind
the
of,
20th.
it's,
Okay,
We're always behind.
all right. Well, let's meet next Tuesday and perhaps approve it on the 13th.
if you,
If not, we'll approve it on the 20th.
20th is fine, I wanted to remind you that the 13th, the way this has happened the last couple of years that I've seen it, the 13th is not a night. We'll reopen the public hearing, and you'll have some public input, and that will take a chunk of time. And I think there'll be some people, I know that we didn't have at the beginning of the process, but you'll have some folks come on the 13th. But it's not like you've got an hour or two to discuss the depth of budgeting. And then when you get to the next meeting, if you have it on the 20th, it's hard to come in and say, okay, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves now, because we got to put a number down, and that night you have to, that night you'll have to make a motion to approve a number, something, a package, so that we can hand it off. So just don't get to the last night and not have had the opportunity to ask your questions and have your discussion.
Okay, so people have questions, please get them to Brian and me so we can bring them to our Friday meeting.
What time is your meeting on Friday?
10 o'clock in the morning.
So we have till 9:59 to get you the questions?
Try to get them in by
We will, I mean,
Thursday night.
and I think the only constraints on that are, so when we have that meeting on Friday, that gives us the next
Couple of
week.
days.
Well, it's really about 3 days in the office to turn around whatever it is.
So the earlier the better.
The earlier
Yeah,
the better.
all right, do you want us to put a,
Better than
a
chance. You get
do you
it.
want us to put a better deadline? Today's Tuesday, so,
And the sooner we get it, the more time we have to
Tomorrow.
try to put things
could we
together.
have them by tomorrow, by 5 PM? Any budget questions that you want addressed at next Tuesday's workshop?
Could we push to Thursday? I would appreciate
Thursday,
that.
okay,
please.
Thursday at 5 PM.
And
Okay.
may I make a suggestion that
Yes.
might help us on next Tuesday? Is in the email that gets sent to us, the packet, when possible, can the answers be answered?
Yes.
So we can read those rather than going through each one. And then that way, if we have additional questions, rather than taking the whole time to go over.
Okay, yes, if
And I
they
think-
can.
So I think we have, what I'm imagining, and I don't know if we're on the 6th, I'm trying to remember when we're going to do this. So I've got the,
okay.
Lee had some questions around already, so we had some questions around out-of-district placement.
Yeah, I made a list.
Lisa had some questions around para-utilization
And mental health.
and mental health. I've got a group of people working on mental health right now. And I'm leaving out something. So we've got some stuff we're already kind of churning.
In the
I
works,
like
okay.
your idea, which is like, to the extent to which we can create it in paper that you see in advance. So it's not like we have to do the book report on it.
Right.
It's like, here it is. What more do you want to know? We'll try to do that.
I mean, even if it doesn't, as Carrie just pointed out, that the agenda's going to be out Friday, is it possible, even as you're working on it, maybe to give it to us by Tuesday morning,
Add
Monday
to
or
it.
something, not in an agenda form, but maybe in a memo type form. So that way there's more time to work on the answers, so that we come in all prepared with the information that we need, and a lot of questions can already be answered.
I think the only thing will be, depending on how I'm interpreting your suggestion, would be at what point are we getting into, are we doing an open meeting law violation by putting out the
Okay,
information?
and I was wondering.
And I don't know, it depends on how we're doing it, so.
I would just say, I think that even though Thursday was requested, I don't think that that's reasonable for you to respond and have it posted on Friday. So I think it might have to be Wednesday.
Oh, you mean the questions to us?
Well, it depends on what, so anything we get on Friday, I mean, if we're looking at it on Friday and we get the meeting on Tuesday, so I'm already imagining right now that our conversation is around the agenda for the 13th.
Right.
Is really, that's what we're meeting on this Friday to talk about the agenda for the 13th. Whatever, the budget hearing stuff, we've got stuff in process right now, like the things that I was just talking about. I've got groups of people working on putting together documents and doing things around that, and we could maybe squeeze in a few.
Take my comment away.
Okay, good.
Lisa?
One other quick thought is, I think for me at least, it's helpful to see what other people ask. Because as we get to the end, and it's like, if I'm the only one asking about mental health, then I don't want to keep asking the question. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know that that's the case or not, but it's helpful for me to at least see, oh, 4 other people also were curious about this. Or if you want to say who, I don't, not to put people on the spot, but just to know if it really is the will of the board, or it's really just me taking a flyer in some direction that's not really where everybody else is going. I don't want to spend 2
And I
hours
would
talking
say
about it
that on the other
necessarily.
side of that coin, if you've already asked a question, then I might not ask it again. So I also, I mean, for that
If you have a
reason,
question, just ask it.
well,
I mean, we don't have time.
but I know,
to
but I've already
decide.
heard her like request this, so I'm not also going to say, by the way, could you request? So I think that I think for both of those reasons, it would be helpful if we could see what other people have asked, but I don't know how to.
Well, are the requests that were made on record tonight going to be part of, or we need to re-request those?
No,
I got to sort through
we've-
everything.
I've written it down.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I've got some notes, Patty's got notes.
Okay,
So we're all
I'm
set.
just, if we don't need to re-request them, I would just like to have some consideration to what was said tonight and
Yes.
what those
We're doing
requests
that,
were.
Liz.
Okay, thank you.
That was the plan. Okay. All right. Well, if you could get requests to us by Thursday at 5 for Byron's and others, that would be helpful.
Thursday at 5 is, in terms of just, I think.
So you would have a week then. You would get them Friday morning.
Thursday at 5, this is for, just so people have the right expectation.
13th.
Thursday at 5 is for the board meeting on the 13th, which includes the public hearing for the budget.
No, I'm
Which is
talking
fine.
about if we could have a lot of answers to those questions by February 6th,
No.
which is Tuesday. Can you give us
that's done.
some of the information by Tuesday?
There might be some low hanging fruit that we could grab, but realistically, for like thorough answers, and it depends on the volume. So if we're looking at
What about
25
just
answers that
understanding some of
require
these?
half an hour each to be worked on, and Friday, I got people running buildings and doing their other jobs, trying to, probably no, is the.
What about just further understanding these budget cut positions? Because I think those were like really the big requests. I mean, obviously we got a lot of emails about the outdoor ed position. I think a lot of us are kind of wondering like more information about what that position's been doing and what we're losing.
Okay.
Um,
All right, we'll talk about it on
yeah.
Friday, and we'll talk about both meetings on Friday and see what we can, we'll issue an agenda for the 6th and the 13th. Okay. Thank you.
All right, motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Oh, we don't take motions in public.
Liz and Carrie, we can adjourn.
We can adjourn, we can do adjourn.
Okay, let's adjourn. Who wants to adjourn?
Motion to
Did it already.
All right, good.
Yes.
9:49.